Hey there, story lovers. This is Cosmic Wand, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Harry was betrayed by Ron and Hermione and died in Azkaban but woke up in the body of Tom Riddle at age 11. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Death of Harry Potter. The cold was the last thing that still felt real. Not the damp stone under his back or the thin, rotted blanket bunched beneath his shoulder blades. Not the distant drip of water somewhere in the corridor, or the low moan of wind pushing through cracks in the fortress walls. Those had faded months ago into background noise, the texture of nothing, the hum of a life that had stopped being a life and become something closer to waiting. But the cold. The cold was still his. Harry lay on the cot with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling of his cell. There were cracks up there he'd memorized, fissures in the black stone that branched like rivers on a map. He'd named them once, in a fit of delirious boredom sometime in the first year. The Thames. The Severn. The one that looked almost like a bolt of lightning, which he'd refused to name at all. He didn't name things anymore. Naming things meant caring about them, and caring was a luxury that Azkaban stripped away as efficiently as it stripped everything else. Warmth. Hope. The ability to remember that the sun existed not as a concept but as a feeling on your skin. He turned his head. The motion was slow, deliberate, his neck ached in a way that suggested his body was giving up on him, one joint at a time. The cell was 8 feet by 6. He knew this because he'd measured it with his feet in the second week, when he still had enough fire left to rage against the walls, to pound his fists against the iron door until his knuckles split and the guards came with binding spells and cold indifference. That fire was ash now. Through the narrow slit that passed for a window, the sky was the same gray it always was. He didn't know if it was morning or evening. The distinction had lost meaning around the same time he'd stopped counting the days scratched into the wall beside his cot. The last number he remembered making was 412. That was, he tried to think, a long time ago. Maybe a year. Maybe longer. 3 years total, they'd told him at the trial. 3 years in Azkaban's high-security wing for conspiracy to practice dark magic, for aiding and abetting residual Death Eater cells, and this was the one that had made him laugh, a wild, unhinged sound in the silent courtroom, for the murder of 2 muggles in Birmingham whose names he'd never heard before that day. 3 years. As if they expected him to survive it. He flexed his fingers. They responded, barely. His hands were thin, skeletal, almost, the knuckles too prominent, the skin stretched tight and pale. These weren't the hands of a 21-year-old. They were the hands of an old man, someone who'd been hollowed out from the inside and left as a shell. A Dementor drifted past the door. He felt it before he saw it, the temperature dropping another impossible degree, the familiar tug at the edges of his mind, like fingers hooking into the folds of his brain and pulling. He didn't fight it anymore. There was a time when he'd cast a Patronus wandlessly, raw and desperate, and the silver stag had filled his cell with light so fierce the Dementor had recoiled. The guards had come running. They'd put suppression cuffs on his wrists the next day, rune-etched iron that drained his magic like a slow bleed. The Dementor lingered. Through the grate in the door, he could see the edge of its cloak, tattered and black, hovering an inch above the stone floor. "Go on, then," Harry whispered. His voice was a rasp, barely there. Not much left to take. It drifted away. Even the Dementors had grown bored of him. He closed his eyes. The memories came whether he wanted them or not. That was the cruelty of this place, not that it took your happy memories, but that it left the worst ones sharp as glass, rotating endlessly behind your eyelids like a slideshow designed by someone who hated you. The courtroom. Courtroom 10. He'd stood in the same chair they'd put Barty Crouch Jr. in, chains and all, and he'd looked up at the Wisengamot with something that was still, at that point, close to defiance. Because he was Harry Potter. He'd killed Voldemort. He'd walked into a forest and died and come back and won, and surely, this was a misunderstanding that would collapse under the weight of its own absurdity. Then Ron walked in. Harry's breath caught even now, 3 years later, in a cell, half dead. The memory still had teeth. Ron hadn't looked at him. That was the thing Harry kept coming back to, the way Ron had crossed the courtroom floor with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the witness stand like Harry wasn't even there. He'd been wearing new robes. Good ones. The kind the Weasleys could never afford before, and Harry's mind had snagged on that detail with the desperate focus of someone who didn't want to process what was actually happening. Mr. Weasley, please describe for the court your observations of Mr. Potter's behavior in the months following the Battle of Hogwarts. Ron had cleared his throat. He was different. After the war. Secretive. He'd disappear for days, wouldn't tell me or Hermione where he'd been. I found dark artifacts in his flat, things I didn't recognize, books with runes I couldn't read. Harry had stared at him. Just stared. Because it wasn't true. None of it was true, and Ron knew it wasn't true, and yet the words kept coming in that steady, rehearsed cadence that didn't sound anything like the Ron Weasley who couldn't lie about eating the last biscuit without going red to his ears. I believe, Ron had said, and here he'd paused, and for one fraction of a second his eyes had flickered toward Harry and then away again, fast, like touching a hot stove. I believe Harry was working with remaining Death Eater elements. I believe the war changed him in ways none of us wanted to see. The courtroom had erupted. Harry hadn't heard any of it. He'd been watching Ron's hands, the way they gripped the edge of the witness stand, white-knuckled, trembling. He was afraid, Harry had realized. Ron was afraid. Of what? Of whom? He never got the answer. Hermione was worse. Hermione had cried. She'd sat in the witness chair with tears streaming down her face and her voice breaking every third word, and she'd told the Wizengamot that Harry Potter had been practicing soul magic. That she'd found notes in his handwriting, she'd emphasized, and produced parchment that Harry had never seen before in his life, detailing rituals that bordered on the creation of Horcruxes. I didn't want to believe it, she'd said, and the tears were so convincing that even Harry, who knew with every fiber of his being that she was lying, felt something in his chest crack. He's my best friend. Was. But I won't let loyalty blind me to what he's become. The gallery had murmured with the satisfied sound of people who'd always suspected the boy who lived was too good to be true. Harry had said nothing. What was there to say? He'd looked at Hermione and thought, I died for you. I walked into that forest for you, and for Ron, and for everyone in this room, and you're sitting there manufacturing evidence with tears in your eyes and you won't even tell me why. He'd opened his mouth to speak in his own defense, and the words hadn't come. Not because of magic, because of something worse. Because he'd looked out at the courtroom and seen Kingsley Shacklebolt in the minister's seat with an expression of careful neutrality, and Arthur Weasley in the gallery refusing to meet his eyes, and Neville Longbottom, Neville, sitting 3 rows back with his face in his hands, and Harry had understood with a clarity that felt like falling that it didn't matter what he said. The verdict was already written. The trial was theater. He was Harry Potter, and they were done with him. The chains had tightened when they read the sentence. 3 years. And Harry had laughed, that wild, broken laugh, because 3 years in Azkaban for the savior of the wizarding world was the ministry's way of saying we can't execute you publicly, but we can make sure you don't come back from this. He hadn't. A cough rattled through his chest. Wet, thick, the kind of cough that carried weight. He'd been coughing blood for the last week, maybe 2. Hard to tell time when every hour bled into the next. The suppression cuffs had done something to his magic, he could feel it, dammed up inside him like a river behind a wall of ice, pressing and pressing with nowhere to go. Wizards weren't meant to have their magic suppressed for years. It turned inward. It ate you from the inside out. He was dying. He'd known it for a while now, felt it in the way his heartbeat had grown irregular, the way his vision blurred at the edges, the way he couldn't feel his feet most days. His body was 21. It felt 80. Another cough. This one brought blood, he tasted copper, felt it warm on his lips. He thought about Ginny. He hadn't thought about Ginny in a long time, because the Dementors had taken most of those memories, the burrow in summer, her hair in the sunlight, the way she'd kissed him after the battle like she was trying to prove they were both still alive. But he thought about her now, and instead of warmth he felt only the cold fact that she hadn't come to the trial. Hadn't visited. Hadn't written. He thought about Sirius. He thought about Dumbledore. He thought about his parents, standing in the forest clearing, transparent and luminous, telling him they were proud. Were they still proud? His heartbeat stuttered. Oh, he thought. This is it, then. He didn't fight it. There was nothing to fight for and no strength to fight with. He lay on the cot in his cell in Azkaban and let his eyes drift closed, and the cold pressed in from all sides like water filling a room, and the last thing Harry Potter felt was something almost like relief. Then nothing. Then, light. Not the grey half-light of the cell. Real light, warm, golden, pressing against his eyelids with an insistence that felt almost aggressive. He squeezed his eyes tighter and turned his head, and the motion was wrong. Too easy. His neck didn't ache. His chest didn't rattle. He was lying on something soft. A bed. A real bed with a real mattress and a real pillow, and the air smelled like, he inhaled, dust and old wood and something faintly chemical, like soap or bleach. His heart was beating. Steady and strong, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Harry opened his eyes. A ceiling. White plaster, cracked in places but nothing like the black stone of Azkaban. A bare light bulb hung from a cord. The window to his left had thin curtains, and morning light was streaming through them with the warm honey quality of late summer. He sat up. The motion was effortless. His body felt light, small, young, and that word snagged in his mind because something was very wrong. He looked down at his hands. They were a child's hands. Small. Smooth. Unmarked. No scars across the knuckles, no calluses from years of wand work, no suppression cuff burns around the wrists. He turned them over, staring at his palms, and his breathing started to come faster. He was in a narrow room. Iron frame bed, thin mattress, a wooden dresser with a cracked mirror on top, a wardrobe with one door hanging slightly open. The walls were bare except for a cross above the door. The floor was scuffed hardwood, and through the closed door he could hear sounds, children's voices, distant, the clatter of dishes, someone calling out a name he couldn't quite catch. Harry swung his legs off the bed. His feet dangled. He was short, properly short, not the lean, angular shortness of malnutrition but the compact smallness of childhood. He was wearing threadbare pajamas 2 sizes too large, and when he stood, the floor was cold under his bare feet. The mirror. He crossed the room in 3 steps and looked at his reflection, and the world tilted sideways. The face looking back at him was not Harry Potter's. It was pale, sharp-featured, handsome in a way that was unsettling in a child, cheekbones too defined, jaw too clean, something about the proportions that suggested elegance rather than softness. Dark hair, almost black, neatly parted despite sleep. And the eyes. Dark eyes. Not green. Dark and deep and familiar in a way that made Harry's stomach turn to ice. He knew this face. He'd seen it in a diary. In a memory. In the swirl of a pensieve, looking up at him with a charming smile that hid something rotten underneath. Tom Riddle. Harry stumbled backward. His legs hit the bed and he sat down hard, and for a long moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except sit there with his hands, Riddle's hands, gripping the edge of the mattress while the room spun around him. No. No, this wasn't, this couldn't, he pressed his fingers to his forehead. Smooth skin. No scar. No, he said aloud, and the voice that came out was a boy's voice. Light, clear, with a London accent that wasn't his. No, 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 a knock at the door made him flinch so hard he nearly fell off the bed. Tom. A woman's voice, sharp and impatient. "Breakfast. Now. I won't call again." He sat frozen. The footsteps retreated down the corridor. Tom. She'd called him Tom. Harry pressed his palms against his eyes and tried to think. He was dead. He knew he was dead, he'd felt it, the way everything had gone quiet and cold and then simply stopped. You didn't mistake that. You didn't imagine the moment your heart gave out and the darkness came down like a curtain. So either this was some afterlife designed by someone with a vicious sense of humor, or something else had happened. Something that shouldn't be possible, something outside the boundaries of any magic he'd ever studied or heard of or imagined. He looked at the mirror again. Tom Riddle's 11-year-old face stared back at him, and Harry felt a wave of revulsion so intense it was almost physical. This was the face that would become Lord Voldemort. This was the boy who would grow up to murder his parents, split his soul into 7 pieces, and plunge the wizarding world into decades of terror. And Harry was wearing it like a suit. He stood slowly. Crossed to the dresser. There was a small cardboard tag tacked to the inside of the wardrobe door, handwritten in faded ink, Tom M. Riddle, Wool's Orphanage. Wool's Orphanage. 1930s London. He was in Tom Riddle's childhood, in Tom Riddle's body, and if the quality of the light and the age of the face in the mirror were any indication, he was 11 years old and it was the summer before Hogwarts. His legs felt weak. He sat on the floor with his back against the wardrobe and pulled his knees to his chest and tried to breathe, tried to think, tried to do anything other than scream. Why? How? Was this some kind of cosmic punishment? Hadn't Azkaban been enough? He'd fought a war, he'd sacrificed everything, he'd been betrayed by the people he loved most, and now the universe had decided the appropriate encore was to stuff him into the body of the darkest wizard in modern history. He bit down on the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood. Riddle's blood. The thought made him want to retch. Think, Potter. Think. He was here. Whatever the mechanism, whatever the reason, he was here, and unless he figured out a way to undo it, here was where he'd stay. And if he was here, in this body, in this time, then Tom Riddle wasn't. The original Tom Riddle, the boy who would have grown up to become Voldemort, was gone. Replaced. Overwritten. Which meant Voldemort might never exist. Harry's breathing slowed. He lifted his head. Voldemort might never exist. No Horcruxes. No First War. No Second War. No prophecy. His parents, James and Lily Potter, wouldn't even be born for another 20 years, but when they were, they could live. They could grow old. They could, he stopped himself. He was getting ahead of things by decades. Right now, he was an 11-year-old orphan sitting on a cold floor in a London children's home, and someone downstairs expected him at breakfast. Harry stood up. He looked in the mirror again, and this time he held Tom Riddle's gaze, his own gaze, he supposed, and made himself see it differently. Not as a mask. Not as a punishment. As a weapon. He knew the future. He knew every mistake, every horror, every pivotal moment from now until 1998. He knew about Grindelwald's rise and fall, about the Deathly Hallows, about the Chamber of Secrets and the Room of Requirement and the prophecy that wouldn't be made for another 40 years. He knew about Dumbledore's secrets and Snape's choices and the exact location of every Horcrux that would now never be created. He had a lifetime of combat magic in his head. He'd fought Death Eaters and Dementors and a Basilisk and a dragon and Voldemort himself. He'd died and come back, twice now, apparently. And he was in a body with a magical core that would have grown into the most powerful dark wizard in a century. The face in the mirror almost smiled. Not Riddle's smile, not that cold, charming thing Harry had seen in the diary. Something harder. Something with edges. Right, then. He got dressed. The clothes in the wardrobe were worn but clean, gray trousers, a white shirt with a fraying collar, socks that didn't quite match. He dressed quickly, efficiently, the way he'd learned to in the Dursley household, which felt like several lifetimes ago and, he did the math, was technically about 50 years in the future. The corridor outside his room was narrow and dim, with doors on either side and the smell of boiled cabbage drifting up from below. He followed the sound of voices down a flight of stairs, past walls hung with framed rules and a portrait of some benefactor with a disapproving mustache, and into a dining hall that was long, low-ceilinged, and full of children. About 30 of them, ranging in age from toddlers to teenagers. They sat at 2 long wooden tables, eating porridge from mismatched bowls, and the noise was the specific chaos of children crammed together in too small a space, arguments over bread, spilled milk, a girl crying in the corner while an older boy ignored her. Harry paused in the doorway. A few heads turned. Most didn't. He spotted an empty seat at the far end of the nearest table and moved toward it. The children he passed gave him a wide berth, subtle, practiced, the way you'd shift away from a dog you didn't quite trust. One boy, maybe 8 or 9, actually flinched when Harry's sleeve brushed his shoulder. They were afraid of him. Of Riddle. Harry sat down. A bowl of grey porridge materialized in front of him, not by magic, but by a haggard woman in an apron who set it down without looking at him and moved on. He picked up the spoon. Ate. The porridge was tasteless and lukewarm, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in 3 years, because Azkaban's food had been worse and his dead body's stomach had stopped accepting even that toward the end. He ate slowly, carefully, because this small body wasn't used to being genuinely hungry and he didn't want to be sick. Riddle. He looked up. A boy across the table, stocky, red-faced, with the kind of mean little eyes that reminded Harry unpleasantly of Dudley, was watching him. Billy Stubbs says you killed his rabbit. Harry blinked. The memory surfaced, not his memory, but knowledge. He knew this story. Dumbledore had told him, in that other life, in the pensive, Tom Riddle hung Billy Stubbs' rabbit from the rafters. One of the early signs. One of the red flags that should have told someone, anyone, that something was wrong with this child. I didn't, Harry said. The boy stared at him. Then he snorted. Yeah. Sure you didn't. He turned back to his porridge. Harry kept eating. But he was thinking about that rabbit. About the things Tom Riddle had done before Hogwarts, the petty cruelties, the stolen objects, the cave by the sea where he'd terrorized 2 other orphans. Those things had already happened. They were baked into the history of this body, this name, and Harry would carry the weight of them whether he liked it or not. He'd add it to the list. Right after, died in prison, and, inhabiting the corpse of my parents' future murderer. After breakfast, he went back to his room. The orphanage was loud in the way institutions were, never quiet, never private. He sat on the bed and closed his eyes and reached for his magic. It was there. Not like his old magic, not the steady, familiar current that had been part of him since childhood, that had felt like warmth and home and the smell of treacle tart. This was different. Bigger. Wilder. It surged when he reached for it, a rushing torrent of raw power that pressed against his skin like something alive and hungry. Riddle's magical core. Immense even at 11, even untrained, the kind of natural gift that came along once in a generation and could be shaped into anything. Harry pulled back. Carefully. Like withdrawing his hand from a fire. He could work with this. He'd have to learn to control it. His old instincts were calibrated for a different body, a different magical signature, but the power was there. Vast and waiting. No wand, though. Not yet. He opened his eyes. On the dresser, half hidden behind a stack of folded clothes, was a small collection of objects. Harry stood and examined them. A yo-yo. A thimble. A mouth organ. Small things, children's things, but he recognized them for what they were with a chill that went straight to his spine. Trophies. Tom Riddle had stolen these from other children. Kept them hidden in his room like a dragon hoarding gold. Not because they were valuable, but because taking them proved he could. Because other children's pain was the only currency he understood. Harry picked up the thimble. It was small and silver and dented. Some girl's prized possession, probably. Some child who'd cried herself to sleep wondering where it went. He put the items in his pocket. All of them. It took him 20 minutes to find the right children. The yo-yo belonged to a boy named Dennis Bishop, who looked at Harry with naked terror when he approached and then stared in open-mouthed shock when Harry held it out to him. "I think this is yours," Harry said. Dennis didn't take it. He pressed himself against the wall like Harry was pointing a weapon at him. "It's just a yo-yo, Dennis. Is this a trick?" "No." Dennis's eyes darted left and right. Looking for escape routes. An 8-year-old who'd learned to plan escape routes around another child. Harry's stomach turned. "I'm sorry I took it," Harry said. The words felt strange, apologizing for something he hadn't done, for a cruelty committed by a consciousness that no longer existed. But the fear in this boy's eyes was real, and the debt was real, and someone had to pay it. Dennis reached out slowly, snatched the yo-yo, and bolted. Harry returned the thimble to a girl named Martha. The mouth organ to a boy whose name he didn't know but who burst into tears when he saw it. Each interaction was the same: terror, confusion, the stunned disbelief of children who had learned that Tom Riddle only approached you to hurt you. He kept nothing. Back in his room, he sat on the bed and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness, he was too broken for happiness, too hollowed out by Azkaban and betrayal and death. But something adjacent. Something that lived in the neighborhood of purpose. He was here. He couldn't change that. He couldn't undo whatever cosmic accident or design had put him in this body. But he could make sure that the name Tom Riddle meant something different this time around. The afternoon came and went. He stayed in his room, testing his magic in small ways, making the light bulb flicker, levitating the pillow an inch off the bed, warming the air around his fingers. Wandless magic had always been difficult for him before, requiring intense concentration and yielding mixed results. In this body, it was almost easy. The power responded to intention like water flowing downhill. He was practicing, holding a ball of pale light in his cupped hands, the simplest application of the Lumos charm without a wand, when someone knocked on his door. "Tom. You have a visitor." Harry extinguished the light. His pulse spiked. A visitor. At Wool's orphanage, in the summer before Tom Riddle's first year at Hogwarts, there was only one visitor who mattered. He stood, straightened his shirt, and opened the door. Mrs. Cole, the orphanage matron, stood in the corridor. She was a thin woman with a hard face and gin on her breath. Harry could smell it from 2 feet away, and she was looking at him with the particular expression of someone who disliked a child but was trying to be professional about it. "There's a man here to see you." "A professor," he says. "From a school." Her tone suggested she found this unlikely. "He's in the sitting room." "Be polite, Tom." Harry followed her downstairs. His heart was hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the fact that he was about to see Albus Dumbledore. Not the Dumbledore he'd known, not the ancient, silver-bearded headmaster with the half-moon spectacles and the weight of 100 secret burdens behind his twinkling eyes. This would be a younger man. Middle-aged. Still a professor, not yet a legend. A man who still carried fresh guilt over Ariana, who still hadn't faced Grindelwald, who was walking into this orphanage expecting to meet a troubled magical child and had no idea at all, what was actually waiting for him. The sitting room was small and shabby, with mismatched furniture and curtains that might have been cheerful once. A man stood by the window with his back to the door, and even from behind Harry recognized him. The hair was auburn, not silver. He was taller than Harry remembered, or perhaps that was just the perspective of a child's body looking up. He wore a plum-colored suit that was distinctly odd by Muggle standards, flamboyant, even, and when he turned, his face was younger but unmistakable. The same long nose, the same sharp blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles, the same expression of pleasant, careful attention that Harry had seen 1,000 times across the desk in the headmaster's office. Albus Dumbledore, age 57, looked at Harry and smiled. "Hello, Tom. My name is Professor Dumbledore. I've come to tell you about a school." Harry didn't smile back. He stood in the doorway and looked at Dumbledore and felt, what? Too many things. Anger, because this was the man who would one day raise Harry like a pig for slaughter, who would keep secrets that cost lives, who would orchestrate a war from the shadows with chess pieces made of children. Grief, because this was also the man Harry had loved like a grandfather, the man whose death had broken something in him that never fully healed. Recognition. Wariness. The complicated ache of seeing someone you've lost who doesn't know you yet. "May I come in?" Dumbledore asked, and Harry realized he'd been standing there, blocking the doorway, staring. "Yes," Harry said. He stepped aside. "Sorry. Please." Dumbledore entered the room with the easy confidence of a man who was accustomed to being the most interesting person in any space he occupied. He settled into one of the threadbare armchairs and gestured for Harry to sit opposite. Harry sat. He folded his hands in his lap, a conscious choice, because Riddle's hands wanted to grip the armrests and he was aware, painfully aware, that Dumbledore was already watching him with those blue eyes that saw too much. He needed to be careful here. Dumbledore had come to this orphanage in the original timeline and left unsettled. He'd seen something in Tom Riddle that put him on guard, the cruelty, the control, the trophies, the casual admission of power used to hurt. That first impression had colored everything that followed. Dumbledore had never trusted Tom Riddle, and Tom Riddle had known it, and the mutual suspicion had fed on itself until it became the defining dynamic of Riddle's Hogwarts years. Harry had to do this differently. Not by performing innocence, Dumbledore would see through that in a heartbeat. But by being himself. By being Harry, despite the face. "Mrs. Cole mentioned you'd been expecting something like this," Dumbledore said. "She seemed to feel you were, aware that you were different from the other children." "I am different," Harry said. Simple. Direct. No posturing. Dumbledore's eyebrows rose fractionally. "In what way?" "I can do things. Move objects without touching them. Make things happen when I'm angry or scared. Light fires. Talk to snakes." He paused. The snake thing was a risk. In the original timeline, young Tom had boasted about it, and it had been one of the things that alarmed Dumbledore most. But hiding it was worse. If Dumbledore discovered it later, the concealment would look damning. Better to be honest and frame it right. "I didn't understand what it was until recently. I thought I was broken. Or wrong." He let the word wrong hang in the air without drama. Just a boy stating a fact about his own confusion. Something shifted behind Dumbledore's eyes. Not suspicion, curiosity, maybe. Something warmer. "You are not broken, Tom. And you are certainly not wrong. What you can do is called magic, and you are a wizard." Harry let himself nod, slowly, as if absorbing information he already knew. "The school you mentioned. It's for people like me. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "Yes." Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. "It is a place where young witches and wizards learn to understand and control their abilities. You would not be the only one with gifts, Tom. You would be among peers." Peers. The word almost made Harry flinch. He thought of Ron. I believe Harry was working with remaining Death Eater elements, and Hermione. I can't let loyalty blind me, and he shoved the memory down, hard, into the place where he kept things that would destroy him if he let them out. "I'd like that," Harry said. "Being among people who understand." Dumbledore studied him. The silence stretched for a beat too long, not uncomfortable, exactly, but waited. Harry could almost feel the legitimacy brush against his mind, light and testing, the mental equivalent of a knock on a door. He didn't slam his occlumency shields up. That would be a red flag the size of a Quidditch pitch, an 11-year-old orphan with disciplined mental defenses. Instead, he did something subtler. He let Dumbledore see surface thoughts, nervousness, excitement, the genuine confusion of a child being told something extraordinary, while keeping everything else behind a wall of emotion rather than technique. Grief was an excellent shield. It was vast and formless and looked like nothing more than a sad child's inner landscape. The legitimacy withdrew. Dumbledore blinked, and something in his expression softened in a way Harry had never seen directed at Tom Riddle. "I notice you said you talked to snakes," Dumbledore said. His tone was carefully neutral. "Can you tell me about that?" Harry shrugged. "There was a grass snake in the garden last summer. I heard it talking, or I thought I did. I said something back, and it answered. I thought I was going mad." He met Dumbledore's eyes. Is that normal? For wizards. It is rare, Dumbledore said. The ability is called Parseltongue. It is generally associated with. He paused, choosing his words. With a particular magical lineage. Is it bad? The directness of the question seemed to catch Dumbledore off guard. He was quiet for a moment. No ability is inherently bad, Tom. It is what we choose to do with our gifts that defines us. Harry almost laughed. Dumbledore had said almost exactly the same thing to him at 16, in a different office, in a different century. Some things, apparently, were constants. I want to learn, Harry said. Whatever Hogwarts can teach me. I want to understand what I am. Dumbledore smiled. A real smile, not the practiced twinkle and nod of the headmaster Harry remembered, but something genuine and warm that reached his eyes and made him look, for a moment, like a man who still believed the best in people. Then I think you'll find Hogwarts has a great deal to offer you. They talked for another half-hour. Dumbledore explained the basics, the wizarding world, the statute of secrecy, the school year, the supply list. He produced a letter from his pocket, thick parchment sealed with the Hogwarts crest, and Harry took it with hands that trembled only slightly. He'd held this letter before. Different name, different time, but the same seal, the same parchment, the same promise of a world beyond the walls of a place where he'd never belonged. There is a fund, Dumbledore said, for students who require financial assistance. Your supplies will be provided. I'll arrange for someone to accompany you to Diagon Alley next week to purchase what you need, or, if you prefer, I can show you the way myself. I'd like to go alone, Harry said. If that's all right. I do better on my own. He heard the words come out and realized they were true in a way that had nothing to do with Tom Riddle's preferences. Harry Potter did better on his own now. He'd learned that lesson in the hardest way imaginable. Dumbledore considered this. You would need to access the leaky cauldron on Charing Cross Road. It's hidden from Muggle eyes, but you would be able to see it. From there, you can reach Diagon Alley. Do you feel confident navigating London on your own? Yes. Then I'll trust your judgment. Dumbledore stood, and Harry stood with him. One more thing, Tom. Here it comes, Harry thought. The warning. The test. The moment where Dumbledore looked at Tom Riddle and saw the seed of something dangerous. The magical world can be overwhelming, Dumbledore said. Especially for someone coming to it alone, without family to guide them. If you ever find yourself struggling, with your studies, with other students, with anything at all, my door is open. I mean that sincerely. Harry looked up at him. Albus Dumbledore, offering kindness to the boy who was supposed to become his greatest failure. Who, in another timeline, he'd watched and suspected and never quite reached, and who'd grown into the monster that proved him right. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. And meant it, despite everything. Dumbledore extended his hand. Harry shook it. The older wizard's grip was firm and warm, and Harry felt the faintest pulse of magic, diagnostic, probably, the instinctive assessment that powerful wizards couldn't help making when they touched another magical person. Whatever Dumbledore felt, it made his eyebrows twitch upward by a fraction of an inch. "Remarkable," Dumbledore murmured, so quietly Harry almost missed it. Then, louder, "I look forward to seeing you at Hogwarts, Tom." September 1st. He left. Harry stood at the sitting room window and watched him cross the street below, a tall figure in plum robes that no Muggle seemed to notice, walking with long strides into the afternoon traffic and then turning a corner and vanishing. Harry exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. He went back upstairs. Closed his door. Sat on the bed with the Hogwarts letter in his hands and read it twice, 3 times, until the words blurred and he was just staring at the parchment without seeing it. He thought about Azkaban. About the cell, the cold, the slow dissolution of everything he was. He thought about Ron's testimony and Hermione's tears and the way the chains had tightened around his wrists when the verdict came down. He thought about dying. And then he thought about Hogwarts. About the great hall with its enchanted ceiling, the moving staircases, the smell of old books in the library, the way the castle hummed with centuries of accumulated magic. He thought about the first time he'd seen it, from the boats on the lake, and how it had felt like coming home. He would see it again. Not as Harry Potter, not as the boy who lived, not as the war hero or the prisoner or the corpse on a cell floor. As Tom Riddle. A boy with a clean slate and a second chance and the knowledge of a lifetime burned into his bones. The letter crinkled in his grip. He could change everything. He could prevent Grindelwald's worst atrocities, save the lives that would have been lost in the 1940s wars, prevent the rise of Voldemort before it began. He could reshape the entire trajectory of magical history, starting from this room, this moment, this second chance he hadn't asked for and didn't deserve and was going to seize with both hands because the alternative was lying down and dying again and he was done dying. But he had to be smart about it. The butterfly effect was a real concern, changed too much too fast and the future became unrecognizable, unpredictable, potentially worse. He needed to move carefully, strategically, building influence and power without drawing the kind of attention that would get him killed or locked up again. He'd been a Gryffindor. Brave, reckless, leading with his heart. That Harry Potter was dead. The person sitting in this room, holding this letter, wearing this face, that person would need to be something different. Smarter. Colder. More patient. Not cruel, never that, never the thing this body was supposed to become, but calculated in a way that the old Harry had never been. Slytherin, then. When the time came. The thought should have bothered him more than it did. He set the letter on the dresser and lay back on the bed. The ceiling was white plaster and warm afternoon light, and it was nothing like the black stone of Azkaban, and when he breathed the air was clean and warm and free. He was 11 years old. He was Tom Riddle. He had no wand, no allies, no money, and no identity beyond a name that would one day be spoken in whispers if he didn't rewrite the story from the ground up. But he was alive. Against all reason and all possibility, he was alive. The evening came slowly. The orphanage settled into its nighttime rhythms, doors closing, voices fading, the creak of old pipes and the distant sound of Mrs. Cole's radio playing something sentimental through the floor. Harry lay in the dark and listened to the building breathe. He didn't sleep. Not because he wasn't tired, he was exhausted, the deep bone weariness of a soul that had died and been reborn and spent the day pretending to be someone else, but because he was afraid of what he'd see when he closed his eyes. Azkaban dreams. Dementor nightmares. Ron's voice saying I believe the war changed him. Hermione's tears, so convincing, so perfectly performed. He'd deal with that later. He'd deal with all of it later, the grief, the rage, the betrayal that sat in his chest like a stone. For now, there was only the next step. Diagon Alley. A wand. School supplies. The train on September 1st. One foot in front of the other. The way you survived anything. Harry turned on his side and looked out the window. The London skyline was different, no gherkin, no shard, just chimneys and church spires and the faint glow of gas lamps in the street below. A different world. A different century. A different life. Somewhere out there, Gellert Grindelwald was building an army. Somewhere in a Welsh valley, a young Minerva McGonagall was reading by candlelight. In a Wiltshire manor, the Malfoys were hosting dinner parties where the conversation turned, more and more frequently, to the question of magical supremacy. In an office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore was sitting at his desk, thinking about a dark-eyed boy in an orphanage who hadn't been quite what he expected. The pieces were on the board. The game was about to begin. And for the first time since the doors of Azkaban had closed behind him, Harry allowed himself to feel something that wasn't pain. It was small and fragile and buried deep, like a coal that hadn't quite gone out, and he cupped his hands around it in his mind the way he'd cupped the wandless Lumos in his palms. Hope. The faintest, most reckless, most stubborn edge of hope. He held on to it. He closed his eyes. He slept without dreaming. Chapter 2, The Wand chooses. The morning Harry left for Diagon Alley, it rained. Not the gentle English drizzle that misted your face and made the grass smell green, a proper downpour, the kind that turned gutters into rivers and sent pedestrians scrambling under awnings with newspapers held over their heads. Harry stood at the orphanage's front door in his too large coat and watched the water sheet down and thought, with the grim humor of someone who'd learned to find comedy in misery, that at least some things were consistent across timelines. He had money in his pocket, not much. Dumbledore had left a small leather pouch of wizarding currency with Mrs. Cole, along with instructions that it was a scholarship fund for school supplies. Mrs. Cole had handed it over with the air of a woman who suspected she was participating in an elaborate confidence trick but couldn't quite work out the angle. Harry had counted it that morning. 15 galleons, 8 sickles, and a handful of nuts. Enough for the basics, second-hand where possible, new where necessary. He'd done this before. He knew what mattered and what didn't. He stepped into the rain. London in 1938 hit him differently than it had from the orphanage window. The sounds were wrong, no car horns blaring in constant fury, no jets overhead, no electronic hum beneath everything. Horse-drawn carts still shared the roads with motorcars, and the motorcars themselves were bulbous, black things that looked like beetles on wheels. The buildings were soot-stained, the air tasted of coal smoke, and everywhere Harry looked there were signs of a city that didn't know it was 1 year away from war. He walked. He knew the way to Charing Cross Road the way he knew the way to his own, to Harry Potter's common room. Some knowledge was etched deep enough that a change of body couldn't erase it. He navigated the streets with his head down, a thin boy in a grey coat moving through crowds that didn't see him, and the anonymity of it was so sweet it almost hurt. Nobody stared. Nobody whispered. Nobody pointed at his forehead or asked to shake his hand or told him they'd named their child after him. He was nobody. Just a boy on a wet street in a city full of millions. He could get used to this. Charing Cross Road was busy despite the rain. Bookshops lined both sides, their windows steamed and inviting, and Harry slowed as he approached the stretch where the leaky cauldron should be. For a horrible moment he thought it might not be there, that the pub was newer than 1938, that his knowledge had failed him already, and then his eyes found the gap between a bookshop and a record store, and there it was. The same grubby door. The same faded sign that Muggle's eyes slid right past. Smaller than he remembered, or maybe that was the perspective of a body that was closer to the ground. Harry pushed the door open and stepped inside. The leaky cauldron smelled exactly the same. Pipe smoke and ale and the indefinable warmth of a space saturated with decades of ambient magic. It was mid-morning and the pub was half full, witches and wizards hunched over drinks and newspapers, a group of warlocks arguing about something at a corner table, an old woman feeding scraps to a cat that was almost certainly a Kneazle. Nobody looked up when he entered. An 11-year-old in Muggle clothes wasn't unusual. Muggle-born students came through all the time in the weeks before term. Harry crossed the pub quickly, keeping his head down. He passed the bar, where a man who was definitely not Tom the barkeep, too young, different face, though the same tired expression of someone who'd been pouring drinks since dawn, was polishing glasses. He found the back exit, the small courtyard with the rubbish bins and the brick wall. He didn't have a wand. Right. That was a problem. Harry stared at the wall. He knew the pattern, 3 up, 2 across from the bin. He pressed his finger against the brick and pushed his magic through his hand, a focused pulse of intent, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the brick shuddered. Quivered. And the wall began to rearrange itself, bricks folding and sliding and opening like a stone flower until the archway stood before him. Diagon Alley. He'd braced himself for it, but the sight still caught something in his chest and twisted. The cobblestone street. The crooked buildings leaning against each other like old friends. The shop signs swinging in the rain, Flourish and Blots, Elop's Owl Emporium, Quality Quidditch Supplies, though the brooms in the window were antiques by Harry's standards, thick-handled things that looked about as aerodynamic as fence posts. Witches and wizards crowded the narrow street under a riot of umbrellas, and the air hummed with that particular energy, not electricity, not sound, but the background vibration of a place where magic was as common as breathing. It was the same. Different shops in a few places, different faces, but the bones of it were the same. Diagon Alley in 1938 was Diagon Alley, and Harry had to stand still for a moment in the archway and let the rain fall on his face because his eyes were burning and he was not going to cry in the middle of a public street in the body of a future Dark Lord. He didn't cry. He breathed. He moved. First stop, Gringotts. Not because he had an account, Tom Riddle was a penniless orphan, but because he needed to exchange a few of the galleons into smaller denominations and because he wanted to see if the goblins set off any alarm bells. He'd had a complicated relationship with Gringotts in his previous life, what with the break-in and the dragon and the fact that his wanted poster had probably still been up in the lobby when he died. The bank was the same marble monstrosity at the end of the alley, columns and bronze doors and the inscription that Harry knew by heart, "Enter, stranger, but take heed / of what awaits the sin of greed." He walked up the steps, past the goblin guards in their gold-trimmed uniforms, and into the vast hall. The goblins behind the counters were just as unpleasant as he remembered. Harry approached one, a sharp-nosed creature with spectacles and an expression of professional contempt, and requested change for 2 galleons. The goblin looked at him. Looked at the coins. Looked at him again. Name? Tom Riddle. I'm a Hogwarts student. The goblin made a sound that might have been acknowledgement or might have been digestive. He counted out the change, sickles and nuts, precise to the last coin, and slid them across the counter without another word. Harry scooped them into the leather pouch and left. No alarms. No recognition. Just a boy changing money. He allowed himself a breath of relief on the bank steps and then turned to face the alley properly. The rain had eased to a drizzle. Harry pulled the supply list from his pocket, he'd memorized it already, but having the parchment in hand made him look the part, and started working through it methodically. Robes first. Madame Malkin's didn't exist yet, the robe shop in 1938 was called Twilfit and Tattings, which Harry vaguely remembered as the upscale place Narcissa Malfoy had preferred. But there was a smaller shop 2 doors down, Pendergast's Practical Robes, with a sign in the window that read Hogwarts uniforms, second-hand and new. Harry went in. The shop was cramped and warm, racks of black robes in various sizes crowding the floor space, and a witch with steel-gray hair and pins stuck in her collar descended on him immediately. Hogwarts. First year. Stand on the stool, dear. He stood on the stool. She measured him with a tape that moved on its own, the same enchanted measuring tape Madame Malkin would use decades later, or maybe actually the same physical one, and tutored at his dimensions. Thin little thing, aren't you? I'll take these in at the waist. You'll grow into them by Christmas, mark my words. They all do. Harry stood still while she pinned and adjusted, and it was so normal, so mundanely, boringly normal, that he almost smiled. First year. A voice from behind him. Another boy on another stool, being fitted by a younger witch. Harry turned his head. The boy was pale and blonde, with sharp features and grey eyes that were instantly, painfully familiar. He held himself with the unconscious posture of someone who'd been told since birth that he was important, spine straight, chin up, an 11-year-old who'd already mastered the art of looking down at people. Harry knew that face. He'd seen it sneering at him across classrooms and corridors for 6 years, aged 37 and terrified in the room of requirement, lifeless on the floor of a courtroom in a future that might never exist now. But this wasn't Draco Malfoy. This was his grandfather. Yes, Harry said. First year. Abraxas Malfoy. The boy extended his hand with the practiced ease of someone who'd been taught to network before he could read. Malfoy family. Harry shook it. Tom Riddle. Riddle. Abraxas turned the name over like he was tasting it. I don't know that name. What family? No family. I'm from a Muggle orphanage. The words landed like a stone in a pond. Abraxas's expression didn't change, he was too well-bred for that, but something behind his eyes recalculated. Harry could almost see the mental filing cabinet shuffling, orphan, Muggle-raised, unknown blood status, probably not worth the time. Ah, Abraxas said. Harry didn't flinch. Didn't explain. Didn't do any of the things Tom Riddle would have done in this situation, no subtle intimidation, no charm offensive, no angling for acceptance. He just turned back to the mirror and let the silence sit. It was Abraxas who broke it. Not because he was uncomfortable, Malfoys didn't get uncomfortable, they made other people uncomfortable, but because something about Harry's total indifference had landed wrong. People didn't ignore Abraxas Malfoy. It wasn't done. Which house do you expect to be sorted into? Not sure yet, Harry said. Does it matter? Of course it matters. Abraxas sounded almost offended. Slytherin is the only house worth attending. Gryffindor is for reckless idiots, Hufflepuff for the mediocre, and Ravenclaw for people who'd rather read about things than do them. Harry thought about his years in Gryffindor Tower. About the common room fire and the four-poster beds and the Weasley twins' fireworks and Hermione correcting his essays and Ron laughing with his mouth full of chocolate. He thought about Hermione's tears in the courtroom. Maybe Slytherin, then, he said lightly. Abraxas looked at him again. Longer this time. Reassessing. Riddle, he said again. I suppose we'll see. The fitting which finished with Harry first. He paid 3 sickles for a second-hand set of robes, already hemmed, and left the shop without looking back. But he could feel Abraxas Malfoy's eyes on him all the way to the door. The rest of the supplies came quickly. Potions, ingredients from the apothecary, standard first-year kit, bundled in a wooden case. Parchment, quills, ink from a stationery shop where the quills argued with each other in the display case. A cauldron, pewter, standard size, from the shop next to Gringotts. A telescope, second-hand. A set of glass files. Harry moved through the alley efficiently, keeping his head down, spending as little as possible. He had the discipline of someone who'd grown up with nothing and the knowledge of someone who knew exactly what was worth buying and what was a waste of money. He skipped the unnecessary accessories, the fancy quill sets, the monogrammed trunk. Function over form. Survival over style. He saved the bookshop for second to last. Flourish and Blots was smaller in 1938, only 2 floors instead of the 3 he remembered, with a different facade and a doorbell that chimed in 4-part harmony when you entered. The smell, though. The smell was exactly the same. Old paper and binding glue and the faint ozone tang of protective charms on the more volatile texts. Harry collected the required textbooks methodically. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot, and Harry's hand tightened on the spine, because he'd met Bathilda Bagshot, or what was left of her, and the memory was not a pleasant one. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emmerich Switch. 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Phillida Spore. The texts were identical to the ones he'd used in 1991, the curriculum, apparently, hadn't changed in 50 years. He wasn't sure if that was comforting or depressing. He paid and was about to leave when a display near the door caught his eye. A stack of books with a dark green cover, embossed with gold letters, The Rise of the Dark Arts, A Political History by one Hamish Macfarlane. There was a placard beside the stack, banned in Germany. Restricted in Austria. Read it before they ban it here. Harry picked up a copy and flipped to the introduction. It wasn't what he'd expected, not a how-to manual, but a genuine political analysis of how dark magic movements had risen and fallen throughout wizarding history. The author's thesis was that Dark Lords weren't anomalies but symptoms of systemic failures in magical governance. Interesting. Potentially useful. He checked the price. 2 galleons, more than he could afford. He put it back. Another time. Controversial choice, someone said behind him. Harry turned. A witch was watching him from the next aisle over, middle-aged, handsome, with dark hair swept up under a fashionable hat and the kind of expensive robes that whispered rather than announced their quality. She had sharp eyes and a half-smile that suggested she was perpetually amused by something no one else could see. "I was just looking," Harry said. "The best books are the ones people try to stop you reading." She tilted her head. "First year at Hogwarts?" Harry nodded. "You have good taste for an 11-year-old. Most first years can barely look past the Quidditch section." She extended a gloved hand. "Cassandra Vablitsky." Harry shook it. He knew the name. She was, or would be, the author of Unfogging the Future, the divination textbook. Which meant she was either a seer or an excellent charlatan, and given that she was striking up conversation with the boy who was supposed to become Voldemort, Harry wasn't sure which option concerned him more. "Tom Riddle," he said. "Well, Tom Riddle. A piece of advice, free of charge." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Hogwarts will teach you spells. It won't teach you to think. Do that bit yourself." She straightened, smiled, and swept out of the shop with her books tucked under her arm. Harry watched her go. Then he left the bookshop and turned toward the last stop on his list. The one he'd been saving. The one that mattered more than all the others combined. Ollivander's. The shop sat where it always had, narrow, shabby, wedged between 2 larger buildings like an afterthought. The sign above the door read Ollivander's, makers of fine wands since 382 BC in peeling gold letters. The window displayed a single wand on a faded purple cushion, and the overall impression was of a place that either couldn't be bothered with appearances or had made a deliberate aesthetic choice to look as uninviting as possible. Harry pushed the door open. The bell chimed. The shop was dim and dusty, stacked floor to ceiling with narrow boxes, and the air was thick with the smell of wood and magic, not spell magic but something older, rawer, the ambient resonance of thousands of wands humming quietly in their cases. "Good afternoon." Harry didn't jump. He'd been expecting the dramatic entrance. Ollivander always materialized like a ghost from the shelves, pale-eyed and too close, and this version was no different. Except he was younger. Not the ancient, silver-eyed man Harry had rescued from Malfoy Manor. This Ollivander was perhaps 60, still spry, with dark hair going grey at the temples and those same unnerving moon-pale eyes that seemed to see straight through you. Actually, Harry realized with a jolt. This might not be the same Ollivander at all. The Ollivander he'd known had been born around 1907, which made him only about 30 in 1938. This must be his father, Gervase Ollivander, the previous master wandmaker. "I need a wand," Harry said. "Obviously." Gervase Ollivander's lips twitched. "You would not be in a wand shop for the ambience." "Hogwarts?" "Yes, sir." "Wand arm?" Harry held up his right hand. Ollivander produced a measuring tape from his pocket and it went to work, measuring his arm, his fingers, the span of his hand, the distance between his eyes, and several other dimensions that Harry was fairly sure had nothing to do with wandcraft and everything to do with Ollivander family eccentricity. "Every wand is unique," Ollivander said while the tape measured the circumference of Harry's left kneecap. "The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Riddle. Tom Riddle. Mr. Riddle. The wand chooses the wizard, and the choice is absolute. I do not sell wands. I introduce them to their partners." He caught the measuring tape mid-air and pocketed it. "Let us begin." He disappeared into the shelves. Harry heard boxes sliding, the tap of wood on wood, muttered commentary. Then Ollivander returned with an armful of narrow cases. "Try this. Ash, 12 inches, unicorn hair core. Flexible." Harry took the wand. He knew instantly it was wrong, the wood was inert in his hand, dead weight, no resonance at all. He gave it a wave anyway. Nothing happened. No. Obviously not. Ollivander snatched it back. "This one. Elm, 10 3/4 inches, dragon heartstring. A faint spark, quickly dying." Ollivander's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. There's power there, but the wood can't hold it. Something denser, I think. Here, ebony, 11 inches, phoenix feather." Harry's hand closed around the wand and for a moment, a brief, electric moment, he felt something. A hum. A pulse. The faintest echo of another wand, another life, holly and phoenix feather and the warmth of recognition. But it wasn't right. Close, heartbreakingly close, but the connection faltered and died like a candle flame in a draught. Almost, Ollivander breathed. He was staring at Harry now with an intensity that was frankly alarming. Almost, but not quite. The feather responds, but the wood resists. Or, no. The wood is willing. It's the feather that's hesitating. How peculiar. He took the wand back and stood very still, studying Harry the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for facets, flaws, the hidden geometry that determines value. "Wait here," he said, and vanished into the back of the shop. Harry waited. His heart was hammering. He knew what wand was coming. In the original timeline, Tom Riddle had been matched with you and Phoenix Feather, 13.5 inches, the brother wand to the one that would one day be Harry Potter's. The twin cores. The connection that had saved Harry's life in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. But Harry wasn't Tom Riddle. Not really. His soul was different, his magic was different, channeled through Riddle's body but shaped by Harry's experiences, Harry's choices, Harry's identity. Would the wand still choose him? And if it did, what did that mean? Ollivander emerged from the back room carrying a single box. He set it on the counter and opened it slowly, almost reverently. The wand inside was dark. Not black, a deep reddish brown, like old wine or dried blood, with a grain so fine it was almost invisible. It was long and slightly curved, elegant in a way that was more architectural than decorative. "You," Ollivander said. 13.5 inches. Phoenix feather core. A powerful combination, you is the wood of death and rebirth, of endings and beginnings. This wand has been waiting for some time. Harry reached for it. His fingers were trembling and he couldn't stop them. He lifted the wand from its case. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Warmth flooded up his arm and through his chest, not the gentle warmth of the ebony wand's almost connection but a roaring heat, a bonfire, a sunrise, magic pouring through the channel of the wand like water through a broken dam. Golden sparks erupted from the tip, spiraling upward in a display that was far more dramatic than anything Harry had produced with his holly wand at age 11. The boxes on the shelves rattled. The windows hummed. The dust in the air ignited into tiny points of light that hung suspended for a long, breathless moment before fading. Harry stood in the aftermath with the wand in his hand and felt, for the first time since waking in Wool's orphanage, whole. The magic that had been wild and churning inside Riddle's body settled into a current, still vast, still powerful, but directed now, focused, given a path. The wand was warm in his grip, almost alive, and beneath the surface he could feel the phoenix feather humming like a plucked string. Fawkes, he thought. This core came from Fawkes. The same phoenix. The same feather, the twin of the one that would have gone into Harry Potter's Holly Wand, if Harry Potter ever existed now. The connection was still there, still real, reaching across timelines and bodies and identities to find him. Ollivander was staring at him with his mouth slightly open. It was the most human expression Harry had ever seen on an Ollivander. Well, the wandmaker said. He removed his spectacles, polished them, and put them back on. That was, rather emphatic. Is that normal? Harry asked, because he was supposed to be an 11-year-old who didn't know any better. Normal? No, Mr. Riddle, that was not normal. I have been making and selling wands for 40 years and I have seen perhaps 3 reactions of that magnitude. Ollivander leaned across the counter, those pale eyes boring into Harry's. This wand has been in my shop since I crafted it in 1908. 30 years, it has waited. You should know, the phoenix who supplied this feather gave only one other. Just one. I used it in a wand of holly, which I sold to a young witch in 1919 who went on to become a rather notable Auror. Twin cores, Mr. Riddle. Connected. That connection will manifest in ways neither you nor I can predict. Harry kept his face still. Holly and phoenix feather. In the original timeline, that twin wand had been Harry Potter's. Now it belonged to some Auror he'd never heard of, and the implications of that were dizzying. I'll take it, Harry said. The wand has already taken you, Ollivander corrected. 7 galleons. Harry paid. It was more than half his remaining money, and he didn't hesitate for a second. He slid the wand into his sleeve, not his pocket, his sleeve, the way Aurors carried backup wands, an instinct so deeply ingrained it was automatic, and left the shop. Outside, Diagon Alley was wet and grey and beautiful. Harry stood on the cobblestones with a wand up his sleeve and felt something shift inside him, tectonic and irreversible. He wasn't helpless anymore. He wasn't a prisoner, wasn't a dying man on a stone floor, wasn't a ghost wearing someone else's skin. He was a wizard. Armed, dangerous, and invisible in a world that had no idea what was coming. The rain had stopped. Pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds, and the wet cobblestones gleamed like polished silver. Harry walked back toward the leaky cauldron with his packages under his arm and his wand warm against his forearm and his mind racing. He was crossing through the pub when he heard it. Grindelwald's position is entirely rational, if you set aside the sentimentality. Harry's step faltered. He stopped at the bar, pretending to adjust his packages, and listened. 2 wizards at a corner table, leaning close, speaking in the low voices of men discussing something they knew was controversial. One was middle-aged, portly, with expensive robes and a signet ring that caught the light. The other was younger, lean, with the hungry look of a true believer. The statute of secrecy is a cage, the younger one was saying. Grindelwald understands that. We have the power to reshape the world, we have a duty to reshape it, and instead we hide in the shadows like rats. Careful, Avery, the older wizard murmured. Harry's ears pricked. Avery. He knew that name, would know it, across decades and war and the inner circle of a Dark Lord who no longer existed. I'm not being incautious, I'm being honest. The Muggles are building machines that can destroy cities. How long before they turn those machines on us? Grindelwald says a great many things from the comfort of Nurmengard Castle. Talk is easy. Revolution is not. It won't be talk much longer. He's moving. Austria is already his. Czechoslovakia will follow. And the Muggle situation, the younger wizard dropped his voice further. The Muggles are going to tear themselves apart, Rosier. Another war, everyone says so. When that happens, the statute won't hold. The question isn't if the magical world goes public, it's whether we go public on our knees or on our feet. Harry stood very still. He knew what was coming, not just Grindelwald's war, but the Muggle one. World War II was a year away. The Blitz, the camps, the 60 million dead. And in the shadows of that colossal Muggle catastrophe, Grindelwald would wage his own war for magical supremacy, and the wizarding world would burn too, and it wouldn't end until 1945 in a legendary duel that Dumbledore hadn't yet found the courage to fight. He wanted to walk over to their table and tell them everything. About the war, about the camps, about what, for the greater good, actually looked like when you followed it to its logical end. But he was 11, and they wouldn't listen, and revealing knowledge he shouldn't have would only make things worse. He left the pub. Out on Charing Cross Road, the Muggle world was oblivious and bustling, and Harry walked through it with the weight of two futures on his shoulders, the one he'd lived through and the one he was about to enter. The walk back to the orphanage took 40 minutes. Harry used the time to think. Grindelwald was the immediate threat, not to Harry personally, not yet, but to the wizarding world. His ideology was already seeping into the pureblood families, the Averys and Rosiers and probably the Malfoys too. By the time Harry arrived at Hogwarts in September, the student body would already be divided along ideological lines, with pureblood supremacists on one side and everyone else trying not to notice. In the original timeline, Tom Riddle had thrived in that environment. He'd used the pureblood ideology as a tool, never truly believing in it. He was a half-blood himself, but wielding it like a weapon to recruit followers and build power. He'd become the alternative to Grindelwald, a homegrown Dark Lord for the British purebloods who wanted supremacy without the inconvenience of following a foreigner. Harry would not do that. But he couldn't simply oppose the ideology openly either, not as Tom Riddle, not as a half-blood orphan in Slytherin house. He'd be crushed. He needed to be smarter than that. He needed to build a different kind of influence, one that wasn't based on fear or blood purity or borrowed ideology. He needed allies. The thought made his stomach clench, because allies meant trust, and trust was the thing that had killed him. Ron's face flashed behind his eyes. Not the Ron from the courtroom, the earlier Ron, the real one, sitting across the chessboard in first year with a stupid grin on his face and saying that's wizard chess, Harry. You've got to make some sacrifices. Had that Ron been real? Had the friendship ever been genuine, or had Harry been fooling himself the entire time? He didn't know. He'd never know. And that uncertainty, that inability to look back at the best years of his life and know whether they were real, was worse than the betrayal itself. He pushed the thought away. Not now. Later. Never, if he could manage it. The orphanage materialized through the gray afternoon, its brick facade dark with rain. Harry let himself in through the front door, carried his packages upstairs, and locked his bedroom door behind him. He sat on the bed with his trunk open, not a proper wizarding trunk, just a battered suitcase Mrs. Cole had dug out of storage, and laid out his purchases one by one. Robes. Books. Cauldron. Potion ingredients. Parchment and quills. Telescope. And the wand. He drew it from his sleeve and held it across his palms. 13.5 inches. Phoenix feather. The wand that, in another timeline, would have cast the killing curse at his parents. Would have split a soul into 7 screaming fragments. Would have terrorized a world for decades. In this timeline, it was his. And he would make it mean something different. Harry pointed the wand at the pillow on his bed. Wingardium Leviosa. The pillow shot off the bed, hit the ceiling with a thump, and stayed there, pressed against the plaster with enough force to leave an impression. The magic that flowed through the wand was almost embarrassingly powerful. What should have been a gentle levitation charm had become a cannon blast. Harry lowered the wand. The pillow dropped. He caught it with his free hand and set it down slowly. Calibration. He needed to calibrate. Riddle's magical core was a reservoir where Harry's had been a river, broader, deeper, more forceful. And the U-wand amplified that force rather than moderating it. Every spell he cast would need to be carefully controlled, deliberately restrained, or he'd blow his cover before term even started. He spent the next hour practicing. Basic charms, Lumos, Nox, Wingardium Leviosa, Reparo, each one cast at minimum power, then half power, then full. It was like learning to drive a different car. The controls were in the same places, but the engine was a different beast entirely. By the end of the hour, he could cast a first-year charm without shattering anything, but it required conscious effort. A sustained, deliberate throttling of power that would need to become second nature before he set foot in a classroom. He was working on a careful Lumos, soft, controlled, the kind of gentle light an 11-year-old might produce on his first try, when someone rattled his door handle. Tom. Supper. Harry extinguished the light, slipped the wand back into his sleeve, and went downstairs. Supper at Wool's orphanage was bread, butter, and a thin stew that was mostly potato and ambition. Harry ate at the end of the table in Riddle's usual, isolation. The other children gave him the same wide berth they always did, though Harry noticed something different tonight. A few of them were watching him with expressions that weren't quite fear. More like uncertainty. Confusion. Dennis Bishop, the yo-yo boy, was staring at him from across the table with the intense concentration of a child trying to solve a puzzle. Harry met his eyes and nodded. Just a nod. Dennis looked away quickly, but not before something in his expression shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it made room for something else. Curiosity, maybe. The cautious, tentative curiosity of an animal that's been hit before but is being offered food. After supper, Harry went to the garden. Orphanage was a generous word for the outdoor space. It was a small, walled yard with patchy grass and a single tree, an elderly oak that had been dropping leaves into the gutter for longer than anyone could remember. Harry sat under it with his back against the trunk and watched the sky fade from gray to purple. Footsteps in the grass. He looked up. A girl. Maybe 9 or 10, with tangled brown hair and a bruise on her cheek that she wasn't trying to hide. She stood 3 feet away, fidgeting with the hem of her dress, and looked at him with the defiant wariness of someone who'd made a decision and was trying not to regret it. Martha said you gave her thimble back. Harry nodded. Why? Because it was hers. The girl stared at him. She chewed her lower lip. You're different, she said. Lately. Different than before. Maybe. Amy says you're planning something. That you're being nice so we'll let our guard down and then you'll do something awful. Amy's wrong. She usually is. The girl took a step closer. Then another. She sat down in the grass 3 feet from him, which was apparently as close as courage would carry her. I'm Ellen. I've been here since I was 4. I know. Course you do. You know everything about everyone here. It's one of the creepy things about you. She said it matter-of-factly, the way children delivered truths that adults would soften. Harry almost smiled. I'm trying to be less creepy. It's working. A bit. She picked at the grass. Is it true you're leaving? Going to some school? In September. Yes. Lucky. The word was small and fierce. I'd give anything to leave this place. Harry looked at her, the bruise, the tangled hair, the thin wrists. An orphan in 1930s London. No magic, no escape hatch, no Hogwarts letter coming to save her. In a year, the bombs would start falling, and children like Ellen would be evacuated to the countryside if they were lucky and buried under rubble if they weren't. It'll get better, he said. The words felt hollow even as he said them, because he knew what was coming, and better was a relative term when you were measuring against the Blitz. You don't know that. Ellen said it without accusation. Just fact. No, Harry admitted. I don't. They sat in silence for a while. The sky darkened. Somewhere inside, Mrs. Cole was shouting at someone to get to bed. Tom. Yeah. Whatever happened to you, whatever changed, I'm glad. She got up and went inside, and Harry sat under the oak tree in the dying light and felt the weight of all the people he couldn't save pressing down on his chest. He couldn't stop World War II. He couldn't save the Muggles from themselves, that was beyond the reach of even the most powerful wizard, and intervening would shatter the statute of secrecy and create cascading consequences he couldn't predict. He couldn't save Ellen from the orphanage or the war or the hard life that awaited her. But he could save the wizarding world. He could stop Grindelwald sooner, prevent Voldemort entirely, protect the people who would one day be born into a world shaped by his choices. James Potter. Lily Evans. Sirius Black. Remus Lupin. Neville Longbottom. All the children of the future, the ones who'd fought and died and been broken by a war that originated in the soul of the boy Harry had replaced. That was worth something. That had to be worth something. He went inside. He climbed the stairs. He locked his door and sat on the bed and pulled out the wand one more time. Expecto Patronum, he whispered. He didn't expect it to work. The Patronus charm required a happy memory, and Harry's happy memories were tainted, corrupted by betrayal, leached of warmth by Azkaban's dementors. What was left? What memory could he possibly use that hadn't been poisoned? But something stirred. Not a memory, exactly, a feeling. The golden sparks erupting from the wand in Ollivander's shop. The sunlight through the orphanage window on the morning he woke up alive. Ellen sitting in the grass, saying I'm glad. Not happiness. Not the soaring joy that had powered his stag Patronus in another life. Something quieter. Harder. The stubborn, scarred, beaten-down refusal to stop hoping despite every reason to. Silver mist pooled from the tip of the wand. It swirled, coalesced, tried to find a shape. For a moment Harry thought he saw antlers, the stag, his father's form, the guardian that had always come when he called, but the mist shifted, flickered, and became something else. A phoenix. It was small, barely the size of his hand, and translucent, more suggestion than substance. But it spread its silver wings and opened its beak in a silent cry, and the room filled with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Harry stared at it. The phoenix hovered for 3 heartbeats, then dissolved into mist and faded. Not a stag. Not anymore. He was not who he'd been. The Patronus knew it before he did. Harry Potter's guardian had been his father's echo, the stag that represented protection and love and the family he'd never known. But Harry Potter was dead. The person sitting in this room, holding this wand, living this life, he was something new. Something that had been destroyed and reborn, like a bird burning to ash and rising again. A phoenix. Of course. Harry put the wand under his pillow and lay back. The ceiling was dark now, lit only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside his window. September was weeks away. Hogwarts was waiting. He thought about the Sorting Hat. He thought about the Great Hall and the long tables and the enchanted ceiling showing a sky he hadn't seen in 3 years. He thought about Dumbledore watching from the staff table, blue eyes sharp behind half-moon spectacles, and the chess match that would begin the moment Harry stepped onto the Hogwarts Express. He thought about Abraxas Malfoy, that blonde, arrogant boy in the robe shop who dismissed him in a heartbeat and then couldn't stop staring. About Avery and Rosier in the leaky cauldron, whispering Grindelwald's gospel over ale. About Thaddeus Knott, the 6th-year prefect he hadn't met yet but who was already, according to the history Harry carried in his head, building a network of pure-blood supremacists in the Slytherin common room. He thought about Minerva McGonagall, 11 years old, probably packing her trunk right now in some Scottish village with no idea that the boy she'd meet on September 1st was carrying a dead man's memories and a borrowed face and a plan to rewrite 50 years of history. The pieces were assembling. The game was almost ready. Harry closed his eyes. This time, the dreams came, not Azkaban dreams, not Dementor nightmares, but something older and stranger. He dreamed of Hogwarts as he'd never seen it, lit by candlelight and full of ghosts, and in the dream he was walking through the corridors with the wand in his hand and the silver phoenix on his shoulder, and every door he passed opened at his touch, and every room was empty, and every room was waiting to be filled. He woke before dawn. The orphanage was quiet. London was quiet. The world was balanced on the edge of a war it didn't know was coming, and Harry was balanced on the edge of a life he hadn't planned to live. He got dressed. He packed his trunk, carefully, methodically, everything in its place. He put the Hogwarts letter on top, where he could see it. 28 days until September 1st. He was ready. Chapter 3, The Serpent's House. Platform 9 3/4 was exactly where Harry remembered it, and absolutely nothing like he remembered it. He stood on the Muggle side of King's Cross Station with his battered suitcase and watched the crowd flow past, men in hats and overcoats, women in long skirts, porters pushing carts piled with leather trunks. The station was grand and grimy, all iron arches and steam and the echoing clatter of 100 trains coming and going. No electronic departure boards. No coffee chains. No tourists dragging wheeled luggage. Just stone and steel and the organized chaos of a railway station in the last summer before the world tore itself apart. Harry checked the clock above the main concourse. 10:15. 45 minutes until the express departed. He'd left Wool's orphanage at 7 that morning, slipping out while Mrs. Cole was still in her office with her tea and her gin. She hadn't said goodbye. None of the children had either, except Ellen, who'd left a folded piece of paper under his door the night before. He'd opened it on the bus. It said, in a child's careful handwriting, "Don't be creepy at your new school." He'd folded it back up and put it in his pocket, and it was there now, warm against his thigh like a talisman. He walked to the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. A Muggle family passed, arguing about luggage. A porter wheeled a cart of mailbags. Nobody was watching. Harry leaned against the barrier and fell through. The noise hit him first, not the muted rumble of the Muggle station but a brighter, sharper chaos. Children's voices, the hoot of an owl, the hiss of steam, the crack of a disapparition somewhere to his left. Platform 9 3/4 materialized around him in a rush of color and sound, and there it was. The Hogwarts Express. Scarlet and gleaming, venting white steam from its stack, magnificent in the way that only a magical locomotive could be. It was the same train. The same red paint, the same brass fittings, the same engine that had carried Harry Potter to Hogwarts in 1991 and would carry him again, in a different body, to a different fate, today. The platform was crowded. Families clustered around the carriages, parents fussing over trunks and robes, children leaning out of windows to wave. The fashions were different, witches in longer robes, wizards in more structured cloaks, the general aesthetic several decades more formal than Harry was used to, but the energy was the same. The buzzing, electric excitement of September 1st. The beginning of everything. Harry gripped his suitcase and walked toward the train. He moved through the crowd like water through rocks, sliding between family groups without making contact, without drawing attention. He was good at this, at being invisible in plain sight. Azkaban had taught him stillness, and the Dursleys had taught him smallness, and between the two he could pass through a crowd of 100 people without a single one registering his presence. He found a compartment near the back of the train, empty, quiet, away from the worst of the noise. He stowed his suitcase on the overhead rack, sat by the window, and watched the platform through the glass. Families. Everywhere, families. A woman was straightening her son's collar while he squirmed. A father was lifting his daughter onto the train step, and she was laughing, and he was pretending to drop her, and she screamed with the delighted terror of a child who knew she was safe. Two brothers were wrestling over a chocolate frog while their mother watched with the patient resignation of someone who'd given up on dignity years ago. Harry watched all of it and felt nothing. Then he felt everything, all at once, a wave of something so intense it was almost nausea, grief and rage and longing and the bone-deep unfairness of it, the cosmic joke of being given a second life in a body that had never known love while surrounded by people drowning in it. He closed his eyes. Breathed. Let it pass. When he opened them, the compartment door was sliding open. Is anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full, well, not full, but there's a boy 3 compartments up who's already set his trunk on fire and I'd rather not. The girl in the doorway was 11, give or take. Tall for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a severe braid, sharp features, and the kind of posture that suggested either ballet training or a very strict mother. She was already in her Hogwarts robes, which were pressed to a crisp that bordered on military, and she was carrying a book under one arm, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, which she'd clearly already started reading, judging by the bookmark halfway through. Harry's heart did something complicated. Minerva McGonagall. 11 years old, rail-thin, all angles and intensity, looking at him with an expression that was equal parts politeness and impatience. It's empty, Harry said. Sit wherever you like. She sat across from him, arranged her book on her lap, and studied him with the frank assessment of a child who hadn't yet learned that staring was rude. I'm Minerva McGonagall. First year. Tom Riddle. Same. Riddle. She turned the name over the same way Abraxas Malfoy had, but without the pure-blood calculation. She was just filing it. Are your parents on the platform? No parents. I'm from an orphanage. She absorbed this without pity or awkwardness, just a nod, a minor recalibration. My father's a muggle. Minister, actually, the church kind, not the government kind. My mother's a witch. She went to Hogwarts. Gryffindor. And you want Gryffindor too? I want whichever house I'm suited for. She said it with the precise conviction of someone who thought about this carefully and arrived at an answer she was satisfied with. Though yes, probably Gryffindor. The McGonagalls tend that way. The train lurched. A whistle screamed. Through the window, Harry saw the platform begin to slide backward, families waving, a woman running alongside the train to blow one last kiss, and then the station was gone and they were moving, rattling over points and switches, and London was unspooling past the windows in a blur of rooftops and chimney pots. Minerva opened her book. Harry looked out the window. The silence between them was comfortable, the silence of two people who didn't need to fill air with noise to justify sharing space. It was, Harry thought, exactly the kind of silence the real Minerva McGonagall would have appreciated. They'd been traveling for perhaps 20 minutes when the compartment door opened again. Riddle. Abraxas Malfoy stood in the doorway. He'd changed since the robe shop, literally, into Hogwarts robes so new they practically crackled, with a silver serpent pin on his collar that was not part of the standard uniform and probably cost more than Harry's entire wardrobe. Behind him, 2 other boys lurked, one tall and dark-haired, the other shorter and broader, both wearing the same expression of expensive boredom. Malfoy, Harry said. Abraxas's eyes flicked to Minerva, assessed her in a glance, robes decent but not luxurious, book in lap, no family crest, and dismissed her. I've been looking for you. Come sit with us. The compartment up front is more comfortable. I'm fine here. A beat. Abraxas wasn't used to being refused, that much was clear from the way his jaw tightened by a fraction. The Lestranges and the Blacks are up front. You should meet them before the sorting. First impressions matter. They do, Harry agreed. Which is why I'm not going to spend them trailing after someone I met in a robe shop. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. The 2 boys behind Abraxas shifted. Minerva looked up from her book with the careful attention of someone who'd just become very interested in the conversation. Abraxas stared at Harry. Harry stared back. He knew this game, he'd played it with Draco Malfoy for 6 years, and Draco had been a pale imitation of the family template. Abraxas was the original model, the mold from which generations of Malfoy arrogance would be stamped, and behind those grey eyes was a mind that was sharper than his grandson's would ever be. You're bold for an orphan, Abraxas said. I'm bold for anyone. Something moved behind Abraxas's eyes. Not anger, interest. The cold, appraising interest of a predator encountering something it couldn't immediately categorize. Fine, Abraxas said. Sit where you like. But Riddle, Slytherin is about connections. You can't survive it alone. I'll keep that in mind. Abraxas turned and left, his two shadows following. The compartment door slid shut. Minerva was watching Harry with her head tilted slightly, the way a cat watches something it's not sure about. Friend of yours? No. He seems to think you should be. He seems to think a lot of things. Minerva's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but adjacent. Malfoy. Old family. Old money. Old opinions. She paused. You handled that well. It wasn't hard. No, but most people wouldn't bother. Most people would have gone with him. Easier to swim with the current. Harry looked at her, really looked at her, this girl who would grow into one of the most formidable witches of the century, who would face down Death Eaters and stand beside Dumbledore and fight in wars and survive everything the world threw at her with her spine straight and her principles intact. At 11, the bones of that woman were already visible. The steel was already there. I'm not very good at easy, Harry said. No, Minerva said, studying him. I don't think you are. She went back to her book. Harry went back to the window. The countryside was rolling past now, green fields and hedgerows and the occasional village, England in September, gorgeous and oblivious. Somewhere to the east, across the channel, a man named Grindelwald was building a fortress and an ideology. Somewhere to the south, a man named Hitler was eyeing Poland. The world was a powder keg, and Harry was riding a train through the English countryside with an 11-year-old girl reading a Transfiguration textbook and a wand that wanted to set things on fire. He allowed himself to lean his head against the window and close his eyes, not sleeping but resting, letting the rhythm of the train soothe something in him that had been clenched tight for years. The last time he'd ridden this train, he'd been 17, heading to a war he didn't expect to survive. He hadn't survived it, technically. He'd died in the forest and come back and then died again in Azkaban, and now here he was, impossibly alive, impossibly young, riding toward a castle that had been his home in a life that no longer existed. The compartment door opened twice more during the journey. Once for an older student selling sweets from a trolley, Harry bought nothing, but Minerva purchased a pumpkin pasty and offered him half, which he accepted because refusing would have been strange and because he was hungry and because the small kindness of it cracked something in his chest that he pretended didn't happen. Once for a cluster of curious first years, 2 girls and a boy, who poked their heads in, saw Minerva's forbidding expression, and retreated. As the afternoon wore on and the sky dimmed, Harry changed into his robes. Minerva had the grace to turn away, and he had the grace to be quick about it. The robes were second-hand and slightly too long, but they were his, in the way that nothing at the orphanage had ever been his, and the weight of them on his shoulders felt like armor. The train began to slow. Through the window, Harry could see the first lights of Hogsmeade, warm yellow pinpricks in the gathering dark, a village that wouldn't change much in 50 years, the same pubs and shops and winding streets he'd snuck through under an invisibility cloak in another life. We're here, Minerva said, closing her book. Harry stood. His heart was hammering. He'd faced Voldemort and a basilisk and an army of Death Eaters and the slow death of Azkaban, and none of it had prepared him for this, for the sight of Hogwarts rising out of the darkness like something from a dream he'd been afraid to have. They stepped off the train into the cool September night. The platform was chaos, students shouting, owls hooting, trunks thudding. And then, cutting through the noise like a foghorn, Fur's years. Fur's years over here. Harry froze. The voice was different. Wrong. Not the deep, warm rumble he'd known, because Hagrid was, Harry did the math, about 10 years old right now, a student himself, not the gamekeeper. The man calling for first years was someone else entirely, a squat, broad-shouldered wizard with a lantern in one hand and a slightly harassed expression. "Og," Minerva said, reading Harry's expression. "The gamekeeper. My mother mentioned him." Harry nodded. He'd heard the name before, Og, Hagrid's predecessor. One more thing that was different. One more reminder that this wasn't his world, not exactly, not anymore. They followed Og down the narrow path to the lake. The first years clustered together, maybe 40 of them, wide-eyed, shivering, some excited and some terrified and some trying desperately to look like neither. Harry spotted Abraxas Malfoy near the front, flanked by his two shadows, looking around with the proprietary air of someone inspecting property he intended to own. The boats were waiting at the water's edge. 4 to a boat, same as always. Harry climbed into one with Minerva and 2 other first years, a nervous boy with red hair who introduced himself as Ignatius Pruitt and a quiet girl named Lucinda Fawley who didn't introduce herself at all. The boats pushed off from the shore. The water was black and still, the sky above it a vast dome of stars, and the oars moved on their own, cutting silently through the dark. And then Hogwarts appeared. It came around the bend of the lake like a revelation, towers and turrets and lit windows, rising from the cliff face in a cascade of stone and light that defied architecture and gravity and common sense. The castle was enormous, ancient, alive in a way that Harry could feel in his bones, a deep thrumming presence that reached out across the water and wrapped around him like arms. He'd told himself he was ready for this. He'd told himself it would be just a building, stone and mortar and enchantment, nothing more, nothing that should break him open. He was wrong. The sight of Hogwarts hit him like a physical blow, and he gripped the side of the boat and stared, and for a moment he wasn't Tom Riddle or Harry Potter or anyone at all. He was just a boy looking at the first place that had ever felt like home, and the emotion that rose in his chest was so vast and complicated that he couldn't breathe around it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Minerva said softly. Harry nodded. He didn't trust his voice. Ignatius Pruitt was craning over the side of the boat, trying to see the squid. Lucinda Fawley had her eyes closed, her lips moving silently, a prayer, maybe, or a spell, or just the repetition of something comforting. And the castle grew larger and larger until it filled the sky, and the boats glided into the cavern beneath the cliff, and Harry stepped onto solid ground and followed the lantern light up the stone steps toward the entrance hall. The doors were massive, oak and iron, 3 times the height of a man, and they opened at Og's touch with a groan that resonated through the stone floor. The entrance hall beyond was exactly as Harry remembered, vast, torchlit, the marble staircase sweeping upward, the distant sounds of the great hall already audible through the closed doors to the right. A figure was waiting for them at the top of the stairs. Not Dumbledore. Dumbledore was the Transfiguration professor, not the deputy headmaster. The wizard standing above them was someone Harry didn't recognize, tall, thin, with a neatly trimmed beard and the slightly distracted air of an academic who'd been interrupted mid-thought. He wore robes of deep blue and spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. "First years. Welcome. I am Professor Merithought's deputy, Professor Galatea." "No, blast, that's not right." He pushed his spectacles up. "I am Professor Herbert Beery, head of Hufflepuff House. In a few moments, you will enter the Great Hall and be sorted into your houses. The 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Your house will be your family while you are at Hogwarts. Triumphs earn points, rule-breaking loses them. At the end of the year, the house with the most points wins the House Cup." He paused. "Any questions?" "No." "Excellent. Follow me." The great hall doors opened, and Harry walked into a memory. 4 long tables. Hundreds of students. Thousands of candles floating in mid-air, their light warm and golden, casting soft shadows across faces both familiar and strange. And above it all, the enchanted ceiling, tonight showing a sky of deep black scattered with more stars than any London child had ever seen, the Milky Way splashed across it like spilled milk. The first years filed down the center aisle. Harry kept his eyes forward, but his peripheral vision was working overtime. The staff table at the far end, Dumbledore was there, seated near the middle, his auburn hair catching the candlelight, his blue eyes tracking the procession of first years with the sharp attention of a man who was looking for something specific. Harry felt those eyes brush over him and then return. Linger. He didn't look back. He kept walking, kept his face neutral, kept his breathing steady. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool at the front of the hall. It was the same hat, battered, patched, the wide rip near the brim that served as a mouth. Harry stared at it and thought, last time you and I talked, you wanted to put me in Slytherin. Careful what you wish for. Professor Beery unrolled a scroll. When I call your name, you will sit on the stool and place the hat on your head. Abbott, Percival. A round-faced boy stumbled forward. The hat was placed on his head. A pause. Hufflepuff. The second table from the right erupted in cheers. Harry waited. The names rolled past: Avery, Titus, Slytherin, Bones, Edgar, Hufflepuff, Crabbe, Horatio, Slytherin. Each sorting took between 5 and 30 seconds, the hat barely touching some heads before shouting its verdict, lingering on others as if genuinely uncertain. Folly, Lucinda. The quiet girl from the boat sat on the stool. The hat considered. Ravenclaw. Lestrange, Reinhard. Slytherin. Of course. Longbottom, Harfang. Gryffindor. Harry's chest tightened. Longbottom. Neville's, he didn't know the exact genealogy, but this was family. The boy who sat down at the Gryffindor table was broad-shouldered and cheerful, nothing like the nervous first-year Neville had been, but the name carried weight that no one in this hall understood. Malfoy, Abraxas. The hat barely grazed his blond head. Slytherin. Abraxas strode to the Slytherin table like he was claiming a throne, and the older students made space for him with the practiced deference of people who recognized money and name. McGonagall, Minerva. Harry watched. He couldn't help it. Minerva sat on the stool with her back perfectly straight and the hat settling over her dark hair, and for a moment, a long moment, nearly a full minute, nothing happened. The hat was deliberating. Harry could see its brim twitching, the rip of its mouth moving silently, and he knew what was happening because Minerva had told him once, in another life, in a rare moment of personal disclosure after 3 glasses of sherry at a Christmas party, the hat wanted to put me in Ravenclaw. We argued for 5.5 minutes. It was the longest hat stall in decades. The hall was getting restless. Students were craning their necks. Even Dumbledore had leaned forward slightly. Then the hat opened its mouth. Gryffindor. Minerva pulled the hat off, set it on the stool with the care of someone handling a valuable object, and walked to the Gryffindor table. She didn't look smug. She looked satisfied, which was somehow worse. Her eyes found Harry's across the hall, and she gave him the smallest nod. He returned it. Not, Thaddeus. Harry's attention snapped to the stool. But no, Thaddeus Not was a 6th year. This was a different Not being called, a first year, Not, cantankerous. The boy was thin and pinch-faced and went to Slytherin without hesitation. More names. Pruitt, Ignatius, Gryffindor. He went to sit beside Minerva, looking relieved. Then, Riddle, Tom. The hall didn't react to the name. Why would it? Tom Riddle was nobody, a half-blood orphan, unknown, unremarkable. Just another first year walking to the stool. Harry sat. The hat settled over his eyes, blocking out the candlelight and the staring faces. And then the hat spoke. Not aloud, inside his head, the way Harry remembered, that small, dry voice that sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. Well. This is, unexpected. Harry said nothing. He kept his mind carefully surfaced, not the iron occlumency walls that would raise red flags, but the layered emotional defenses he'd practiced, grief and determination over the deep architecture of his real memories. You are not what you appear to be, the hat said. In fact, You are the most interesting thing I've encountered in approximately 200 years, and I have sat on a great many heads. Harry thought, very carefully, I need Slytherin. Yes, I can see that. And I can see why. The ambition is there, oh my, yes, though it's not the usual kind. Not power for its own sake. Power for a purpose. That's rarer than you'd think. A pause. There is considerable courage here as well. Extraordinary courage, in fact. More than enough for Gryffindor. I was a Gryffindor once, Harry thought before he could stop himself. Silence. The hat was very still. So you were, it said, and its voice had changed, quieter, more careful. I see. I see a great deal more than I expected to. You carry 2 lives. The weight of them is remarkable. And the pain. Another pause, longer. I should tell you, I cannot reveal what I see in a student's mind. It is the oldest enchantment on me, older even than the Founders. Your secrets are safe. Harry exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. But I must ask, the hat continued. Are you sure about Slytherin? With what you carry, with what you've endured, Gryffindor would welcome you. It would be easier. Easy isn't the point, Harry thought. I need to be where the damage starts. I need to be in the room where it happens. Spoken like a true Slytherin. The hat sounded almost amused. Very well. You know yourself better than most adults, let alone most children. And the potential here, the magical potential in this body combined with the experience in this mind, is frankly terrifying. Use it well. The rip near the brim opened wide. Slytherin. The Slytherin table applauded, not enthusiastically, not the roaring welcome that some students received, but the polite acknowledgement of a new arrival. Harry pulled off the hat and set it on the stool. His hands were steady. His face was calm. He walked to the Slytherin table and sat at the end of the bench, near the first years. Abraxas Malfoy, seated a few places down, caught his eye and gave him a look that said I told you so without moving a muscle. Harry looked up at the staff table. Dumbledore was watching him. Their eyes met across the length of the great hall, and for a moment the noise and the candlelight and the hundreds of students fell away and it was just the 2 of them, the old wizard and the young boy who was not a boy, each taking the measure of the other across a distance that was more than physical. Dumbledore's expression was unreadable. Then he turned to speak to the witch beside him, and the moment broke. The sorting finished. Headmaster Dip Pet, a wizened, ancient man with a wispy beard and a voice like rustling paper, stood and delivered a welcome speech that was long, dull, and distinguished primarily by its complete failure to mention the gathering political storm outside the castle walls. He spoke of academic excellence and house unity and the importance of a good night's sleep, and Harry listened with half an ear and thought, this is the man who's supposed to be protecting these children. Food appeared on the tables. Harry ate, roast chicken, potatoes, something green that might have been beans, and the food was extraordinary after months of orphanage gruel and years of Azkaban rations. He ate slowly, savoring it, and noticed that his hands had stopped trembling for the first time since he'd woken up in Wool's orphanage. Around him, the Slytherin first years were introducing themselves with the careful formality of children who'd been taught that names were currency. Abraxas held court at the center of the group, flanked by Reinhard Lestrange and Horatio Crabbe, and the conversation was a delicate dance of family names and blood status and who knew whom. Harry stayed at the edge of it. He ate. He listened. He catalogued. I don't recognize your name, Riddle. This from Lestrange, who was as dark-haired and sharp-featured as his descendants would be, with the same unsettling intensity in his eyes. What family? None you'd know, Harry said. Muggle-born? Half-blood. The word landed like a pebble in a pond. Ripples of reaction, Lestrange's lip curling, Crabbe's expression going flat and stupid, a girl named Druella Rosier raising one perfect eyebrow. Abraxas said nothing. He was watching Harry with those grey eyes, and there was something calculating in them that went beyond simple prejudice. Half-blood, Lestrange repeated. In Slytherin. The hat seemed to think so, Harry said mildly. He took a bite of chicken. Unless you'd like to take it up with a 1,000-year-old enchanted artifact. I'm sure it would appreciate the feedback. Someone snorted, quickly suppressed. Druella Rosier, Harry noticed, was hiding a smile behind her goblet. Lestrange's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a voice from further down the table cut in. Leave him. Everyone looked. The speaker was an older student, 16, maybe 17, with dark hair swept back from a handsome face and prefect's badge gleaming on his chest. He was lean and sharp-featured, with the kind of easy confidence that came from either genuine competence or carefully cultivated menace. Possibly both. Thaddeus Knott. Harry recognized him not from sight, he'd never seen this face before, but from context. 6th year. Prefect. Slytherin. The timeline matched. The Sorting Hat chose him, Knott said, his voice carrying the languid authority of someone who didn't need to raise it. That's the end of it. Blood status is a conversation for common rooms, not dinner tables. His eyes settled on Harry, and there was nothing warm in them despite the reasonable words. Welcome to Slytherin, Riddle. Thank you, Harry said. Knott smiled. It was a good smile, warm, disarming, the kind of smile that made you want to trust the person wearing it. Harry didn't trust it for a second. He'd seen that smile before, on different faces. Lockhart had smiled like that. Umbridge had smiled like that. Tom Riddle himself had smiled exactly like that. The feast ended. Dip-Pet said a few more words that nobody listened to. The prefect stood, and the houses began filing out of the great hall, rivers of black robes flowing toward staircases and corridors and the four corners of the castle. First years, follow me, Knott called, and the Slytherin first years fell in behind him like ducklings behind a particularly dangerous duck. They descended. Harry had walked these corridors before, not as a student, but as an intruder, during the Battle of Hogwarts, when the dungeons had been chaos and fire and running feet. Now they were cool and quiet, lit by green-tinged torches that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Down one staircase, then another, deeper into the castle's foundations, until the air grew colder and Harry could feel the weight of the lake above them. The entrance to the Slytherin common room was a stretch of bare stone wall in a dungeon corridor. Knott stopped before it and turned to face the first years. The password changes every 2 weeks. Currently, pure ambition. He said the words to the wall, and the stone slid aside, revealing a low doorway. Harry ducked through and straightened up in the Slytherin common room. It was nothing like Gryffindor Tower. Where Gryffindor had been warm and round and red, Slytherin was cool and angular and green. The room was long and low-ceilinged, extending under the lake, and through the tall windows Harry could see the dark water of the lake itself, green-black and rippling, with occasional shapes moving in the depths. The furniture was dark leather and dark wood, the kind of heavy, expensive pieces that suggested the common room had been decorated by and for people who valued permanence over comfort. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, but even the fire seemed colder here, its light green tinged by the reflections from the lake. It was beautiful in a severe, underwater way. Like being inside a jewel box. Or a cage. Dormitories are through there, Knott said, gesturing to a corridor on the far side. Boys on the left, girls on the right. Your trunks have been sent up. Breakfast is at 7. Don't be late, Professor Slughorn takes attendance and he remembers. Slughorn. Harry filed the name with a flash of memory, the walrus-mustached potions master who'd taught Tom Riddle and regretted it for the rest of his life. Another familiar face in unfamiliar context. The first years dispersed. Harry followed the corridor to the boys' dormitory, a long room lined with 4-poster beds hung with green curtains, each one flanked by a trunk and a bedside table. His battered suitcase looked distinctly out of place among the monogrammed trunks and leather valises. He chose the bed nearest the wall. Drew the curtains. Sat on the edge of the mattress in the green-tinged darkness and let out a long, shaking breath. He was here. He was in Slytherin. In Hogwarts. In 1938. The sounds of the dormitory filtered through the curtains, boys unpacking, talking, the scuff of shoes on stone. Abraxas's voice, cool and proprietary, "This bed's mine. Move your trunk." Crabbe's grunt of compliance. Lestrange muttering about half-bloods. Harry lay back on the bed. The mattress was firm and the sheets were clean and the pillow was soft, and after Azkaban's stone slab, it might as well have been a cloud. He stared at the canopy above him, green silk, embroidered with silver serpents, and listened to the castle breathe. Hogwarts was alive. He'd always known that, but he felt it differently now, through Riddle's magical core, a vast, thrumming presence beneath and around and above him, the accumulated magic of 1,000 years of witchcraft and wizardry soaked into every stone. The castle was aware of him. He could feel it the way you feel someone watching you from across a room, not threatening, not welcoming, just noticing. He wondered what it made of him. A boy who wasn't a boy, carrying a dead man's memories in a dark lord's body. The castle had seen a great deal in 1,000 years. Maybe it had seen something like this before. The dormitory quieted. One by one, the other boys drew their curtains, and the room settled into the particular silence of people pretending to sleep. Harry didn't pretend. He waited until the breathing around him deepened and steadied, and then he slipped out of bed, pulled on his shoes, and left the dormitory. The common room was empty. The fire had burned down to embers, and the lake light filtering through the windows was the only illumination, a shifting, greenish glow that made the room look like the inside of an aquarium. Harry crossed to one of the windows and looked out into the water. Something moved. A shadow, vast and slow, sliding past the glass, the giant squid, probably, making its nightly rounds. Harry watched it pass and felt a strange kinship with the creature. Both of them were trapped in spaces that weren't quite right for them, making the best of an environment they hadn't chosen. Couldn't sleep. Harry turned. He hadn't heard anyone approach, which meant either he was losing his edge or the speaker was very, very good at moving quietly. Thaddeus Knott was leaning against the fireplace mantel, arms crossed, watching Harry with an expression of casual interest that didn't reach his eyes. "First night nerves," Harry said. "Understandable." Knott pushed off from the mantel and walked toward him. His movements were fluid, unhurried, the kind of deliberate grace that came from knowing exactly how much space you occupied and using every inch of it. It's a lot to take in. Especially for someone coming from the Muggle world. It is. I remember my first night. Lay awake for hours, convinced the lake was going to break through the windows and drown us all. Knott smiled. It didn't, obviously. Obviously. Knott settled into one of the leather armchairs near the window. He didn't invite Harry to sit, but the positioning was deliberate, casual, non-threatening, the body language of someone who wanted to have a conversation, not a confrontation. "You handled yourself well at dinner," Knott said. "Lestrange isn't someone most first years would talk back to. His family is connected." "I'm sure they are. And yet it didn't seem to concern you." Knott tilted his head. "Where does that come from? That confidence?" "Not from a Muggle orphanage. It comes from dying twice and killing a Dark Lord and surviving 3 years in the worst prison in the wizarding world," Harry didn't say. What he said was, "I've dealt with bullies before. They're not as complicated as they think they are. Lestrange is a bully, yes. But there are other things in Slytherin besides bullies. More dangerous things." Knott's voice was soft. "This house rewards intelligence and punishes weakness. You're half-blood, orphaned, with no family name and no connections. By the usual calculus, you should be at the bottom of the hierarchy. Invisible, at best. A target, at worst. And you're telling me this because I'm the prefect, and it's my job to look after the younger students. And because, not paused, as if considering how much to say. Because I think you're interesting, Riddle. And interesting people, in my experience, are either very useful or very dangerous. The words hung in the green-tinged air. Harry looked at Thaddeus Knott and saw, beneath the prefect's charm and the older student's authority, the outline of something else. Something patient and hungry and calculating, the mind of a recruiter assessing a potential asset. This was how it had started with the original Tom Riddle too, wasn't it? Not with fear. Not with force. With attention. With the flattery of being noticed, being told you were special, being offered a place in a hierarchy that promised power in exchange for loyalty. Harry knew the playbook. He'd lived through the results of it. I'll try to be useful, then, Harry said, keeping his voice neutral. Dangerous seems exhausting. Knott laughed. It was a warm, genuine sound, and that was what made it dangerous, because it made you like him. Smart answer. Get some sleep, Riddle. Tomorrow starts early. He stood, clapped Harry on the shoulder, a casual, avuncular gesture that was entirely calculated, and left the common room. Harry stayed at the window. He watched the lake light shift and ripple and thought about what had just happened. Knott had made his opening move. Not aggressive, not overt, just a gentle probe, a test of intelligence and disposition. He'd positioned himself as a mentor, a protector, someone who noticed potential where others saw only a half-blood orphan. It was masterful. If Harry had been an actual 11-year-old, he'd have been flattered. Grateful. Receptive. But Harry was not an 11-year-old, and he recognized the recruitment technique because it was exactly, the technique Tom Riddle had used on Slughorn, on the future Death Eaters, on everyone he'd ever drawn into his orbit. Find the lonely ones. Make them feel seen. Give them a taste of belonging. And then, slowly, so gradually they didn't notice, reshape their loyalties until they served your purpose. Knott was doing to Harry what Voldemort would have done to the wizarding world. And behind Knott, somewhere in the shadows, was Grindelwald, the architect, the ideologue, the man whose vision of magical supremacy was being translated into action by sharp young men in prefects' badges. Harry turned from the window. The common room was empty and cold, the embers dying. He went back to the dormitory, slipped into bed, and lay in the dark with his wand under his pillow and his mind working. He had his opening. Knott's interest was a door, and Harry could walk through it, not as a recruit, but as a spy. If Knott was communicating with Grindelwald's acolytes, Harry needed to know what they were planning, who was involved, how deep the network went. You didn't fight an ideology from the outside. You got inside it and pulled it apart from within. But that meant playing a role. Pretending to be drawn in, pretending to be malleable, pretending to be the kind of lonely, brilliant, angry half-blood that Knott would see as a perfect project. It meant lying, consistently and convincingly, to someone who was very good at reading people. Harry could do that. He'd spent a lifetime being underestimated, being seen as something he wasn't. The boy who lived, the chosen one, the traitor, the prisoner, every identity the world had slapped on him had been a mask, and he'd worn them all. One more wouldn't break him. Probably. He closed his eyes. Through the dormitory wall, he could hear the lake, a low, constant murmur, like the castle's heartbeat. Somewhere above him, Minerva McGonagall was sleeping in Gryffindor Tower, and Dumbledore was in his office, and the Sorting Hat was back on its shelf, keeping secrets it had kept for 1,000 years. Tomorrow, classes would begin. Tomorrow, the real work would start, the careful calibration of how much magic to show, the navigation of Slytherin politics, the slow construction of a reputation that would serve his purposes without revealing his hand. But tonight, just for a moment, Harry let himself feel it. The weight of the castle around him. The magic in the walls. The impossible, ridiculous, heartbreaking miracle of being here, alive, young, armed with knowledge and power and a second chance that he was determined not to waste. He thought of Ellen at the orphanage. Don't be creepy at your new school. He thought of Minerva McGonagall, 11 years old, reading Transfiguration textbooks on the train. He thought of a silver phoenix spreading its wings in a dark room. He thought of nothing at all, and slept. He woke to green light and the sound of water and the first day of his new life, and he rose, and he dressed, and he walked out of the dungeons and up the stairs toward the great hall, where breakfast was waiting and the enchanted ceiling showed a sky of perfect, impossible blue, and the future, his future, everyone's future, was an open door. Chapter 4, What Grows in Darkness. 3 weeks into term, and Harry had learned something that surprised him. Being Tom Riddle was easy. Not the identity, that was a minefield of careful lies and constant vigilance. But the mechanics of it, the daily rhythm of classes and meals and common room politics, slid into place with a smoothness that unsettled him. He'd been a student before. He knew how Hogwarts worked, how the staircases moved and the portraits gossiped and the house elves appeared if you stood in the right corridor and said please. The castle was the same. The magic was the same. Only the faces had changed. And the faces were starting to learn his name. It had started in charms. Professor Vickery, a tiny, energetic witch who bore no resemblance to Flitwick but taught with the same infectious enthusiasm, had asked the first years to attempt a basic levitation charm on the first day. Most of them had managed nothing. A few had produced sparks. Abraxas Malfoy had gotten his feather to twitch impressively before it caught fire. Harry had waited. He'd watched the others struggle, noted the common errors, wrong wrist angle, improper emphasis on the incantation, too much force. Then, when Vickery's attention was elsewhere, he'd raised his wand and said, Wingardium Leviosa, with the precise pronunciation and the gentle swish and flick that he'd performed 10,000 times in another life. The feather rose. Smoothly, steadily, straight up to eye level, where it hovered in perfect stillness. Vickery had turned. Her eyebrows had climbed toward her hairline. My word, Mr. Riddle. That's, on your first attempt. Beginner's luck, Harry had said, and let the feather drift back down. But the classroom had gone quiet, and he'd felt the weight of 30 pairs of eyes recalculating what they thought they knew about the half-blood orphan at the back of the room. He'd been more careful after that. Not perfect, perfect was suspicious, and a boy who performed every spell flawlessly on the first try would draw exactly the kind of attention he was trying to avoid. Instead, he calibrated. Excellent in some subjects, merely good in others. Strong in practical work, deliberately average in written assignments. He let himself struggle visibly with history of magic, not difficult, given that Professor Binns was already a ghost and already the most soporifically boring teacher in the history of education, and showed genuine effort in herbology, where the hands-on work was different enough from his memories that the learning was almost real. But in Transfiguration, he couldn't help himself. Dumbledore's classroom was on the first floor, a bright, airy space with tall windows and a collection of objects on the shelves that hummed with residual magic. Dumbledore taught from the front of the room, pacing, his plum-colored robe swishing with each turn, and his style was nothing like the gentle, grandfatherly manner Harry remembered from later years. This Dumbledore was sharp. Quick. He asked questions that had 3 right answers and wanted you to find the 4th. He demonstrated spells with a casual precision that made the extraordinary look effortless, and he watched his students with those blue eyes that saw everything and gave nothing away. The first lesson had been matchstick to needle. Standard first-year fare. Harry had sat at his desk with the matchstick in front of him and his wand in his hand and thought, don't overdo it. Don't stand out. You're an 11-year-old orphan who's never held a wand before September. He'd managed to hold back for almost 10 minutes. Then Dumbledore had walked past his desk, glanced down at the unchanged matchstick, and said mildly, having difficulty, Mr. Riddle. And something in Harry, some stubborn, reckless thing that lived in the part of him that was still a Gryffindor, had responded to the challenge in those blue eyes. He'd tapped the matchstick. Once. It shivered and transformed, not into a crude silver needle like most first attempts, but into a perfectly formed, gleaming pin with a sharp point and a round head, the kind of complete transformation that most students didn't achieve until third year. The classroom had gone dead silent. Dumbledore had picked up the needle. Turned it over in his fingers. Held it up to the light. Full material transformation, he'd said quietly. Complete structural change. Molecular alteration of wood to metal. He'd set the needle down and looked at Harry, and there had been something in his expression that went beyond impressed. It was the look of a man who'd just seen something that didn't fit his model of the world and was rapidly rebuilding the model to accommodate it. Quite remarkable, Tom. Thank you, Professor. Have you practiced transfiguration before? No, sir. Just, it made sense. The theory in the textbook. I read ahead. It was a thin excuse and they both knew it. Reading ahead didn't produce that level of practical skill. Nothing produced that level of practical skill except either unprecedented natural talent or extensive prior experience, and an orphan from a Muggle children's home shouldn't have had either. Dumbledore had held his gaze for a long moment. Then he'd smiled, that warm, disarming smile that Harry recognized from 1,000 interactions, and moved on to the next student. But after class, as the first years filed out, Dumbledore had said, "A moment, Mr. Riddle," and Harry had stayed. The classroom emptied. Dumbledore sat on the edge of his desk, an informal posture, deliberately unthreatening, and regarded Harry with the careful attention of a man defusing a bomb. "You have a remarkable gift for transfiguration, Tom." "Thank you, sir. I've been teaching this subject for 15 years. In that time, I've seen perhaps 2 or 3 students with natural ability comparable to what you demonstrated today." He paused. "I should like to understand it better. Would you be willing to attempt something slightly more advanced?" Harry's instincts screamed caution. But refusing would be more suspicious than complying, and he needed Dumbledore's trust, or at least his tolerance, more than he needed to hide. "All right," he said. Dumbledore produced a box of matches from his desk drawer and set them on the table. "Transform these. All of them. Into whatever you choose." Harry looked at the matches. There were perhaps 50 of them, scattered across the desk like tiny wooden soldiers. Transforming one matchstick was first-year work. Transforming 50 simultaneously was, well, it was the kind of thing Dumbledore himself might do as a demonstration. But Tom Riddle's magical core was a monster, and the U-wand was humming against Harry's palm, and this was Dumbledore asking, and Harry was so tired of hiding. He raised his wand. He didn't use an incantation, the spell was so fundamental, so deeply engraved in his muscle memory, that words were unnecessary. He simply focused his intent and pushed. The matches transformed. All 50, simultaneously, in a ripple of magic that passed across the desk like a wave. But they didn't become needles. They became chess pieces, tiny, perfect, gleaming silver chess pieces, a complete set arranged in starting position on the desktop, each one no larger than a fingertip but detailed down to the individual pawns' faces. Harry lowered his wand. His hand was steady but his heart was pounding. Dumbledore stared at the chess set. He reached out and picked up the silver king, holding it between thumb and forefinger, and Harry saw that his hand was trembling slightly. "Tom," Dumbledore said. His voice was very controlled. "Who taught you magic?" "Nobody." "That is not possible." "It is if you believe the textbook, Professor." Chapter 3 discusses visualization as the key to successful transfiguration. I visualized. Visualization does not account for simultaneous multi-object transformation with individualized structural variation. That requires a level of magical control that, Dumbledore stopped. He set the chess piece down carefully, precisely, in its correct position on the board. That requires years of practice, Tom. Years. Not 3 weeks. Harry said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a wire. "I am not accusing you of anything," Dumbledore said, more gently. "I am trying to understand. If someone has been teaching you, if you had access to magical instruction before Hogwarts, that is not a crime. But I need to know. Harry looked at him. At those blue eyes, sharp and searching, already carrying the shadows of Ariana and Grindelwald and the terrible cost of brilliance misused. This was a man who had loved a dark wizard and lost a sister and spent the rest of his life trying to atone, and he was looking at an 11-year-old boy in a Slytherin tie and seeing, what? A prodigy? A puzzle? A threat? Nobody taught me, Harry said. I don't know how to explain it. The magic just, it's there. Like breathing. I don't think about it, I just do it. It was the closest thing to the truth he could offer. And Dumbledore, who had spent a lifetime studying the nature of magical ability, who understood better than almost anyone alive that some gifts defied explanation, Dumbledore heard it, and weighed it, and chose to accept it. Not because he believed it entirely, but because the alternative, that an 11-year-old orphan was lying to his face with a sophistication that rivaled his own, was too unsettling to confront directly. Very well, Dumbledore said. He waved his wand, and the chess pieces shimmered and became matches again. You have an extraordinary talent, Tom. I will be watching your progress with great interest. The words were kind. The subtext was not. I will be watching you meant exactly what it sounded like. Thank you, Professor, Harry said, and left the classroom with the feeling of blue eyes on his back like a brand. That had been 2 weeks ago. Since then, Harry had been more careful in Transfiguration, still excellent, because downgrading suddenly would be more suspicious than the original display, but controlled. Measured. He answered questions correctly but not brilliantly. He performed spells well but not spectacularly. He was, by all appearances, a talented student who'd had one extraordinary day and then settled into merely exceptional. Dumbledore watched. Harry felt it in every class, those blue eyes finding him, tracking him, measuring the gap between what he'd shown and what he was showing now. Dumbledore was patient. He'd wait. He'd watch. And eventually, he'd come for answers again, and next time the questions would be harder to deflect. Harry was ready for that. Or he told himself he was. The more immediate problem was Slytherin. The politics of the common room were exactly as brutal as Harry had expected. The hierarchy was built on 3 pillars: blood status, family wealth, and magical ability. By the first 2 metrics, Harry was at the bottom, a half-blood orphan with a Muggle surname and a second-hand trunk. He should have been crushed inside a week. Instead, something odd was happening. Something Harry hadn't entirely planned. The first sign was the homework incident. Cantankerous Knot, the first year, Thaddeus's younger cousin, had been struggling with a potions essay on the properties of Moonstone. He'd been sitting in the common room with his face screwed up in frustration, surrounded by crumpled parchment, and Harry, passing through on his way to bed, had stopped. You're confusing the lunar alignment effect with the tidal resonance, Harry had said, glancing at the essay. Moonstone doesn't amplify magic during full moons. It stores ambient magical energy during the lunar cycle and releases it when ground into powder. That's why it's used in Draft of Peace, the slow release acts as a stabilizer. Cantankerous had stared at him. Then he'd looked at his textbook. Then back at Harry. That's not what the textbook says. The textbook is oversimplified. Professor Slughorn will accept it, but if you want the marks, explain the mechanism. He'd walked away without waiting for a response. But 2 days later, Cantankerous had received an outstanding on his essay, his first, and had told everyone in the common room, loudly and repeatedly, that Riddle had helped him. After that, they came to him. Not openly, not at first, Slytherins didn't admit to needing help. But quietly, individually, in the gaps between classes and after curfew. A question about charms theory here. A request to check a transfiguration essay there. Druella Rosier asked him to explain the wand movement for the color change charm, and he showed her, and she performed it perfectly on her first try, and the look she gave him was the first crack in the wall of pure-blood disdain that had surrounded him since sorting night. Harry wasn't doing it to be liked. He was doing it because it worked. In the original timeline, Tom Riddle had built his following through intimidation and manipulation, fear disguised as charisma, cruelty dressed up as strength. Harry was doing the opposite. He was making himself useful. Indispensable. The person you came to when you needed something, not the person you avoided because you were afraid. It was slower than Riddle's approach. Less dramatic. But it built something Riddle's approach never had, genuine loyalty. People who came to you because you helped them stayed longer than people who came because they feared you. Abraxas Malfoy was the key, and Harry knew it. Of all the first-year Slytherins, Abraxas was the one who mattered most. Not because of his magical ability, he was competent, nothing more, but because of his name, his connections, his position as the natural social center of the pure-blood first years. Where Abraxas went, the others would follow. Win Abraxas, and the political landscape of Slytherin shifted in Harry's favor. The problem was that Abraxas wasn't easy to win. He was smart, genuinely, uncomfortably smart, with a political instinct that his grandson had never inherited. He'd watched Harry's quiet campaign of helpfulness with an expression that said he knew exactly what was happening and was waiting to see where it went. Their first real conversation happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into term, in the common room after everyone else had gone to bed. Harry was reading Magical Theory by Waffling, which was dry as dust but contained useful frameworks for understanding the interaction between magical cores and wand wood, when Abraxas sat down in the chair opposite and said, without preamble, "You're not what you seem." Harry looked up. "Nobody is. Don't be glib. I've been watching you, Riddle. You hold back in class, not always, but enough. You help people, but only when it costs you nothing and gains you something. You're building a network, and you're doing it so smoothly that most people don't even realize it's happening." Abraxas leaned forward. "The question is, what for?" Harry closed his book. He regarded Abraxas across the firelight and considered his options. He could deflect. Play innocent. Claim he was just a friendly orphan trying to fit in. Abraxas wouldn't believe it, and the insult to his intelligence would cost Harry the very thing he was trying to build. He could be honest, partially. Give Abraxas enough truth to feel like he was being trusted, without revealing anything that mattered. He chose the second path. "I'm a half-blood orphan in a house full of purebloods," Harry said. "I have no name, no money, and no family. Every advantage I don't earn, I don't get. So yes, I'm building something. Call it a network, call it a support structure, call it whatever you want. I'm making sure that when someone tries to push me down, and someone will, because that's how this house works, I have people who'll think twice about letting it happen." Abraxas studied him. The firelight caught his gray eyes and made them look silver. "That's pragmatic," he said. "I'm a pragmatic person. Most half-bloods in your position would try to hide. Keep their heads down. Survive. Surviving isn't the same as living." Abraxas's expression shifted. Something opened behind his eyes, not warmth, exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement of a mind that operated on the same level as his own. "My father would tell me to avoid you," Abraxas said. "No name, no blood worth mentioning, no advantage to the family. Associating with you would be, politically inadvisable. And yet you're sitting here. And yet I'm sitting here." Abraxas's lips twitched. "My father is a great man in many respects. But he measures the world in blood and gold, and I've been wondering lately if there might be other currencies." Harry felt a spark of something he hadn't expected, hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind he'd been nursing since Wool's orphanage. Something steadier. Because Abraxas Malfoy at 11 was not Lucius Malfoy at 40. The ideology hadn't calcified yet. The prejudice was learned, not ingrained, and a learned thing could be unlearned if you caught it early enough. There are, Harry said. Competence. Loyalty. The ability to see what's coming before it arrives. And what do you see coming, Riddle? Harry held his gaze. A war. Maybe two. Abraxas went very still. Grindelwald is moving, Harry said, keeping his voice low. Europe is shifting. The Muggles are building towards something terrible, and the wizarding world is going to get caught in it whether we like it or not. The people in this house, the Lestranges, the Rosiers, the Blacks, their families are going to have to choose sides. And the choices they make will determine whether they survive what's coming or get crushed by it. He stopped. He'd said more than he'd intended, the words had come out with a conviction that belonged to a man who'd lived through the consequences, not a boy speculating about current events. Abraxas was watching him with an intensity that was almost physical. You talk like someone who's seen it happen. I read the papers. The papers don't say half of what you just said. Then maybe the papers should try harder. A long pause. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the corridor, a ghost drifted past, trailing cold air. You're dangerous, Riddle, Abraxas said. But I don't think you're dangerous to me. I'm not. Then maybe we should keep talking. Abraxas stood. He extended his hand, the same gesture as the robe shop, but different now. Not an offer of patronage from a name to a nobody. An offer of alliance, between equals. Harry shook it. Abraxas nodded once and walked to the dormitory without another word. Harry sat by the fire and felt the shape of the future shifting, subtly, irreversibly, like tectonic plates beginning to move. The next morning, Abraxas sat beside him at breakfast. Lestrange stared. Druella Rosier raised an eyebrow. Cantankerous not looked confused. But nobody said anything, because Abraxas Malfoy had chosen, and in Slytherin, that kind of choice carried weight. The alliance, unspoken, unnamed, but visible to anyone paying attention, changed the social calculus overnight. Harry was no longer the half-blood orphan on the fringes. He was the half-blood orphan that Abraxas Malfoy had chosen to sit with, and that distinction, in the currency of Slytherin politics, was worth more than a Gringotts vault. Thaddeus not noticed. Of course he did. The older student found Harry in the library on a Thursday evening, alone at a table in the back corner with a stack of books that would have looked ambitious for a fifth year. Harry was reading about wards, theoretical foundations, not practical application, because the practical texts were in the restricted section and he wasn't ready to explain why an 11-year-old needed access to advanced defensive magic. Interesting reading material, Nott said, sliding into the chair opposite. Most first years stick to Quidditch magazines. I'm not most first years. No. You're not. Nott leaned back, casual as always, that easy smile in place. I've been meaning to follow up on our conversation. From the first night. The one where you told me Slytherin rewards intelligence and punishes weakness. That one. I've been watching you, Riddle. You've taken my advice to heart. The thing with Malfoy, very well done. Strategic. And the way you've positioned yourself as the helpful one, the one people come to, that's a classic Slytherin play, and you're executing it better than students twice your age. Harry said nothing. He waited. I have a group, Nott said. Not a club, nothing formal. Just a collection of like-minded students who meet occasionally to discuss ideas. Politics. The direction the wizarding world is heading. He paused. I think you'd find it interesting. There it was. The invitation. Harry had been waiting for it since the first night, and here it was, packaged in the same reasonable, intellectually appealing wrapping that Grindelwald's ideology always came in. What kind of ideas? Harry asked. The kind that matter. The Statute of Secrecy. Muggle-magical relations. The question of whether our world can survive hiding forever, or whether a more active approach might be necessary. Nott spread his hands. Nothing radical. Just conversations that the curriculum doesn't cover. When do you meet? Friday evenings. Unused classroom on the 4th floor. 9 o'clock. Not stood. Think about it. No pressure. He left. Harry stared at the Ward Theory book without seeing it and thought about what he'd just been offered. An in. Direct access to the ideological network that Grindelwald was building inside Hogwarts. The chance to see who was involved, what they were planning, how deep the roots went. It was exactly what he needed. It was also exactly the kind of situation that had gotten people killed, in his experience. Walk into a room full of proto-supremacists as a half-blood orphan, and you were either a recruit or a target. Nott's reassurance, no pressure, was meaningless. These groups always applied pressure. That was the point. Harry closed the book. He'd go. He had to. But he'd go armed, not with magic, but with knowledge. He knew where this ideology led. He'd seen its endpoint in the dark mark burned into arms, in Muggle families murdered for sport, in the corpses piled in Hogwarts corridors after a battle that happened because a handsome, brilliant boy had listened to whispers like these and followed them all the way to the abyss. He would not follow. He would infiltrate, observe, and, when the time was right, dismantle. Friday evening came. Harry told Abraxas where he was going. Not what it was, just that Nott had invited him to a study group and he was checking it out. Abraxas's expression flickered with something Harry couldn't read. Nott's group isn't a study group, Abraxas said. I know. My father's mentioned it. Peripherally. Some of the older families are aware. Are you telling me not to go? Abraxas considered. I'm telling you to be careful. Nott is charming and intelligent and entirely sincere, and that's what makes him dangerous. He believes what he says. True believers are the worst kind. Harry almost laughed, because that was exactly what Dumbledore would have said. The Malfoy capacity for political wisdom, it seemed, had skipped Lucius and Draco entirely. I'll be careful, Harry said. The classroom on the 4th floor was small, windowless, lit by candles that someone had arranged in a circle on the floor. About a dozen students were present when Harry arrived, all Slytherin, ranging from 4th years to 7th years, sitting in chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. Nott stood at the front, and his expression when Harry walked in was one of genuine pleasure. Riddle. Glad you came. Everyone, this is Tom Riddle, 1st year, but don't let that fool you. He's sharper than most of your yearmates. Murmurs. A few nods. 1 or 2 dismissive looks. Harry sat in a chair at the edge of the group and watched. The meeting was exactly what Nott had described, a discussion group, nothing more. The topic that evening was the Statute of Secrecy, and the conversation was sophisticated, nuanced, and terrifying. Not because anyone was advocating violence, they weren't, not overtly, but because the arguments were good. Nott had framed the discussion around a recent article in the Daily Prophet about a Muggleborn witch who'd been forced to obliviate her own parents after accidental magic exposure, and the moral questions that followed were genuine and difficult. The system requires us to erase memories, a 7th year named Dolohov said. Erase the identities of Muggle families. Rewrite their reality without consent. How is that not a violation? How is that not, in its own way, a kind of violence? Because the alternative is worse, someone else argued. If the Muggles discovered us, the alternative is different. Not necessarily worse. We've assumed for 300 years that secrecy is the only option, and we've never seriously examined why. Grindelwald, careful, Nott said mildly. Grindelwald, Dolohov continued, more quietly, has at least asked the right questions. Even if his methods are questionable. Harry listened. He said nothing for the first 40 minutes, absorbing the dynamics of the group, who led, who followed, who was genuinely intellectual and who was performing ideological commitment to impress Nott. The 7th year Dolohov was a true believer. A 5th year named Avery, son or nephew of the man Harry had overheard in the leaky cauldron, was performing. A quiet sixth-year named Mulciber said almost nothing but watched everyone with the flat, assessing eyes of a natural enforcer. "What about you, Riddle?" Nott said eventually. "You've been quiet. Thoughts?" Every head turned. Harry felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "The statute of secrecy is a bandage on a wound that's never going to heal on its own," Harry said. "It was created in 1689 because witches and wizards were being hunted. The threat was real. But the world has changed. The Muggles have moved on from witch trials, they've built cities and railways and machines that can fly. They're not the same people who burned us. And we're not the same people who hid." He paused. The room was very still. "But the solution isn't supremacy. It's not Grindelwald's vision, magical rule over Muggles, for the greater good. That's just tyranny with better marketing. The solution is integration, carefully managed, over time. Not hiding. Not ruling. Coexisting." Silence. Then Dolohov laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Coexisting. With Muggles? Have you seen what they're building? Bombs that can flatten cities. Tanks. Warplanes. They're about to start another war that'll make the last one look like a playground scuffle. You want to coexist with that?" "I want to survive it," Harry said. "And supremacy has never been a survival strategy. It's a suicide note written in someone else's blood." The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Nott was staring at Harry with an expression Harry couldn't read, not angry, not dismissive, something more complicated. Interested. Concerned. The look of a man who'd found a tool that wasn't shaped the way he expected. "Strong words," Nott said, "for a first year. Strong times." The meeting ended shortly after. Students filed out in twos and threes, and Harry was about to follow when Nott caught his arm. "Walk with me." They walked. Through the fourth-floor corridor, past sleeping portraits and empty classrooms, their footsteps echoing in the nighttime quiet of the castle. "You're not what I expected," Nott said. "I keep hearing that. I expected someone I could shape." "You're not shapeable, are you, Riddle?" "No. That's inconvenient." Nott's voice was light, but there was an edge beneath it. "The group needs coherence. A shared vision. What you said in there, about integration, about coexistence, that's not our vision. Then maybe your vision needs expanding." Nott stopped walking. They were in a stretch of corridor lit by a single torch, and the shadows made his handsome face look older, harder. "Let me be direct with you," Nott said. "I like you, Riddle. You're brilliant, you're bold, and you think for yourself, which is rarer than it should be. But the people I work with, the people behind this group, they don't have room for dissent. They have a plan. A timeline. And they need people who are aligned, not people who are going to argue philosophy at every meeting." Harry felt ice crawl down his spine. The people behind this group. Not just Nott, then. There were connections beyond Hogwarts, real connections, to Grindelwald's network. "Who are the people behind the group?" Harry asked. Nott smiled. "That's a conversation for another time. Once you've decided which side you're on." He walked away. Harry stood in a torchlit corridor and breathed slowly, deliberately, counting heartbeats until his pulse steadied. So the network was real. Grindelwald wasn't just inspiring disaffected purebloods from afar, he had active lines of communication into Hogwarts, funneled through students like Nott, building a pipeline of young recruits who would graduate into his army. The meetings were the visible part. Behind them, somewhere, was infrastructure. Communication channels. Maybe even supply lines. Harry needed to find them. And he needed to do it without getting caught by Nott's people or by Dumbledore, who would have his own reasons for shutting down any investigation that involved Grindelwald. He turned to head back to the dungeons and found himself face to face with a snake. It was coiled on the windowsill, a common adder, mottled brown and gray, entirely unremarkable except for the fact that it was watching him with an intelligence that snakes didn't normally possess. "The warm one speaks to empty air," the snake said. "Strange behavior for a two-legger." Harry's blood went cold. Parseltongue. Riddle's body carried the ability, inherited from the Gaunt line, and it was active. He'd known this since the orphanage, since Dumbledore's visit. But he hadn't encountered a snake at Hogwarts yet, and hearing the sibilant hiss resolve into words in his mind was a visceral, unsettling experience. He looked up and down the corridor. Empty. No one to overhear. "What are you doing here?" Harry asked, and the words came out in Parseltongue without conscious effort, a hiss that felt strange and familiar at the same time. The snake raised its head. "Hunting mice. The castle has many mice. Good hunting grounds. You should be careful. Students might hurt you. Students are slow and loud. Easy to avoid." The snake flicked its tongue. "You are different, warm one. You speak the old tongue. Few two-leggers do. I know. There are more of us. In the walls. In the foundations. The castle is full of serpents. The old speaker built paths for us, long ago. The old speaker. Salazar Slytherin. Of course, the founder would have built passages for his serpent companions, woven into the castle's architecture the way the moving staircases and hidden rooms were woven in. A network of snake paths, invisible to everyone except those who could speak Parseltongue. And beneath the castle, in the deepest of those paths, was the Chamber of Secrets. And in the chamber was the basilisk. Harry's stomach clenched. He'd killed that basilisk once, at 12 years old, with a sword and a prayer and more luck than any one person deserved. He didn't relish the idea of encountering it again. But the chamber existed, and the basilisk existed, and both were problems he'd need to deal with eventually. Not tonight. Tonight he had enough problems. "Thank you," Harry told the snake. "Be safe. Be warm," the snake replied, which was apparently the serpent equivalent of goodbye, and slithered away into a crack in the wall. Harry walked back to the dungeons. His mind was buzzing, Knott's group, the Grindelwald connection, the Parseltongue encounter, the looming specter of the Chamber of Secrets. Too many threads, all tangling together, and he was one person in a child's body trying to hold all of them. He entered the common room. It was late, past midnight, and the room should have been empty. It wasn't. Dumbledore was standing by the lake windows. Harry stopped dead. Dumbledore turned, and his expression was, Harry couldn't read it. Not the careful neutrality of their classroom interactions, not the warmth of the orphanage visit. Something raw. Concern, maybe. Or suspicion. Or both. "Professor," Harry said. "What are you doing in the Slytherin common room?" "I came to speak with Professor Slughorn about a student matter. He's retired for the evening, but I thought I'd wait." A pause. "You're out rather late, Tom." "I was in the library. Lost track of time. The library closes at 9. It is 12:30. Harry said nothing. The lie sat between them like a dropped glass. "Sit down, Tom," Dumbledore said. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something in between, the voice of a man who had authority and was choosing, for the moment, to wield it gently. Harry sat. Dumbledore sat across from him, and the lake light played across both their faces, turning everything green and strange. "I am going to ask you a question," Dumbledore said, "and I would like an honest answer. You are not obligated to give me one. But I am asking." Harry waited. "Who are you, Tom Riddle?" The question was simple, direct, and devastating. Not what are you, who. Dumbledore wasn't asking about blood status or magical ability. He was asking about identity. About the fundamental disconnect between what Tom Riddle should be and what Tom Riddle was. Harry looked at Albus Dumbledore, younger, sharper, less burdened than the man he'd known but already carrying the weight of enough secrets to crush a lesser soul, and felt something crack inside him. Not the careful walls he'd built, not the strategic architecture of half-truths and misdirection. Something deeper. Something that had been cracked since Azkaban and was now, under the pressure of those blue eyes, threatening to shatter entirely. He wanted to tell him. God, he wanted to tell someone. The loneliness of carrying 2 lifetimes alone was a weight that grew heavier with every passing day, and Dumbledore was right there, the one person in the world who might understand, who might believe him, who might help, but he couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because Dumbledore in 1938 was not Dumbledore in 1998. He was a man still in the process of becoming, still capable of mistakes that would cost lives, still carrying the Grindelwald guilt that made him simultaneously the best and worst person to confide in about a dark wizard's rise to power. "I'm a boy who wants to learn," Harry said. "That's all." Dumbledore held his gaze for a long time. The lake light shifted. A fish passed the window, its scales catching the green glow. "I don't believe that," Dumbledore said quietly. "But I believe you believe it should be enough for now." He stood. He looked down at Harry with an expression that was, for the first time, genuinely uncertain, a man encountering a problem his considerable intellect couldn't solve, and having the wisdom to know it. "My door is open, Tom. I meant that at the orphanage, and I mean it now. Whatever you are carrying, and you are carrying something, that much is obvious, you do not have to carry it alone." He left. The common room door closed behind him. Harry sat in the green-tinged dark and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and breathed, in and out, until the pressure behind his sternum eased enough that he could think. Dumbledore knew something was wrong. He didn't know what, couldn't even begin to guess, but he'd sensed the incongruity, the gap between shell and substance, and he was going to keep probing until he found answers or Harry found a way to give him enough truth to satisfy. He'd deal with it. He'd deal with all of it, Dumbledore, not, Grindelwald, the Parseltongue, the Chamber, the Malfoy alliance, the half-dozen spinning plates that required his constant attention. He'd been a soldier and a prisoner and a dead man, and none of those things had broken him, and this wouldn't either. But as he climbed into bed and drew the curtains and lay in the dark with the lake murmuring through the walls, Harry felt the cracks widening. The Azkaban memories pressed close, the cold, the isolation, the slow dissolution of everything he was. Ron's voice. Hermione's tears. The courtroom. The chains. He'd been so focused on the mission, prevent Voldemort, stop Grindelwald, save the future, that he'd forgotten to account for the thing that had killed him the first time. Not the Dementors. Not the cold. Not even the betrayal. The loneliness. He was alone. Surrounded by people, building alliances, playing the game, and utterly, fundamentally alone. The only person in the world who knew who he really was him. And the weight of that, the crushing, airless weight of being the only person who remembered a future that would never happen, was enough to destroy him as surely as any dark wizard. He needed something. Someone. Not a strategic ally. Not a chess piece. A person. A real, human connection that wasn't built on lies. Minerva's face flashed through his mind. The train. The book in her lap. "I don't think you are." The way she'd looked at him without pity or fear or calculation, just the straightforward regard of a person who saw another person and decided they were worth talking to. It was a risk. Every connection was a risk. But so was isolation, and Harry had already died of that once. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd find Minerva McGonagall and have a conversation that wasn't strategy. That wasn't about houses or politics or the fate of the wizarding world. Just 2 first years talking, the way first years were supposed to. It was a small decision. Maybe the most dangerous one he'd made since arriving. Harry closed his eyes. The lake murmured. The castle breathed. He slept, and this time the dreams came, Azkaban dreams, cold and dark and endless, Ron's voice echoing off stone walls, I believe the war changed him. But in the dream, a silver phoenix appeared, small and fierce, and it settled on his shoulder and spread its wings, and the cold retreated, and the voice faded, and Harry slept on. Chapter 5, The Path Not Taken. October came to Hogwarts like a held breath. The trees in the forbidden forest turned amber and rust and the color of dried blood, and the lake went dark and still, and the mornings carried a bite that made students pull their cloaks tighter as they crossed the grounds between classes. The castle settled into its autumn rhythms, fires in every hearth, pumpkins appearing in the corridors as if by spontaneous generation, the Quidditch pitch echoing with the crack of bludgers as the house teams began their pre-season training. Harry barely noticed any of it. He was watching Thaddeus not overtly. Not the way Dumbledore watched Harry, with that direct, penetrating gaze that made you feel like an open book. Harry watched not the way you watched weather on the horizon, from a distance, with one eye on the sky and the other on the nearest shelter. Something had changed since the Friday meeting. Not was distracted. Not obviously, his prefect duties continued with the same smooth competence, and his interactions with younger students were as warm and practiced as ever. But Harry caught the edges of it, a conversation cut short when someone entered the common room, a letter at breakfast that Not read once, burned with a flick of his wand, and never mentioned, a meeting cancelled with no explanation. Something was coming. Harry could feel it the way animals felt earthquakes, a low-frequency vibration beneath the surface of things, invisible but undeniable. He kept attending the Friday meetings. The discussions continued, statute of secrecy, Muggle magical relations, the philosophy of magical governance, but the tone had shifted. Less theoretical, more urgent. Dolohov spoke with a fervor that bordered on evangelical. Avery, the performative fifth year, had dropped the performance and was asking questions that suggested genuine radicalization. Even Mulciber, the silent enforcer, had started contributing, short, blunt observations about the practical logistics of change, which Harry understood to be a euphemism for revolution. And Not presided over it all with that easy smile and those intelligent eyes, guiding the conversation like a conductor shaping an orchestra, always one step ahead, always framing the radical as reasonable. Harry attended. Listened. Said little. He'd learned from the first meeting that open dissent marked you as a problem, so he adopted a different approach, asking questions. Probing questions that forced the group to confront the logical gaps in their ideology without Harry having to state his own position. It was a technique he'd learned from watching Dumbledore, ironically enough, the Socratic dismantle, dressed up as curiosity. If we reveal ourselves to the Muggles, how do we prevent reprisal attacks on isolated magical communities? He'd asked during one session, and watched Dolohov's confident answer crumble under a follow-up about Muggle military capability that nobody else in the room had the knowledge to challenge. Not watched these exchanges with an expression that grew more complicated each week. He hadn't made another direct approach since the corridor conversation, no more offers of deeper access, no more hints about the people behind the group. Harry was being assessed. Tested. And the test, he suspected, wasn't about ideology. It was about capability. The question was, capability for what? The answer came on a Thursday night in the second week of October, and it came in the form of screaming. Harry was in the common room. Late, past midnight, his usual hour for reading when the fire was low and the room was empty. Abraxas had gone to bed hours ago, and the only other person awake was a seventh-year girl named Ursula Burke who was writing a potions essay at the far table and ignoring Harry with professional commitment. The scream came from above. Not the dungeons, somewhere higher in the castle, muffled by stone and distance but unmistakable. A high, thin sound, the kind of sound a person made when they were not just frightened but in genuine pain. Harry was on his feet before the echo faded. His wand was in his hand. It slept under his pillow, but he'd taken to carrying it in his sleeve during his late-night reading sessions, a habit born from a lifetime of ambushes, and he was moving toward the common room entrance. Ursula Burke looked up. What was, another scream? Closer. Or louder? Harry couldn't tell. He hit the corridor at a run. The dungeon passages were cold and dark, lit only by the guttering torches, and he took the stairs two at a time, climbing toward the sound. His body was small and light and fast, and the magic in his veins was surging, responding to the adrenaline with a pulse of power that made the torches flare as he passed. Ground floor. The entrance hall was empty, the main doors closed, the marble staircase stretching upward into shadow. The screaming had stopped, replaced by something worse, a low, resonant hum that Harry felt in his teeth, in his bones, in the core of his magic. It was the sound of something deeply wrong. Something that didn't belong in this castle. Dark magic. He recognized it the way a burn victim recognized fire, instantly, viscerally, with a reaction that was as much body as mind. His skin crawled. The hairs on his arms stood up. The yuan thrummed in his grip, responding to the ambient energy with a vibration that was almost eager. He followed the hum. Up the marble staircase, past the first-floor corridor, past the second, the sound growing louder, more insistent, pulling him like a fishhook in his sternum. Third floor. Fourth floor. The corridor outside Knott's meeting room. The door was open. Harry pressed himself against the wall and looked. The room was different. The chairs had been pushed to the walls, the candles extinguished. In the center of the floor, where the discussion circle had been, someone had drawn a diagram, not in chalk but in something that glowed faintly, a sickly amber light that pulsed in time with the hum. Runes. Harry recognized some of them, containment symbols, binding arrays, the angular script of old Northern European magical traditions. Others were unfamiliar, twisted and wrong in a way that suggested they'd been modified from their original form. In the center of the diagram sat an object. It was small, no larger than a fist, and at first glance it looked like a stone. Rough, dark, unremarkable. But the hum was coming from it, and the glow was coming from it, and the magic pouring off it was so thick that the air around it rippled like heat haze. A dark artifact. Smuggled into Hogwarts. Activated. And standing over it, his wand raised, his face pale and slick with sweat, was Thaddeus Nott. He wasn't alone. Dolohov was there, and Mulciber, and two other students Harry didn't recognize, older, 7th years probably, their wands drawn and their expressions ranging from exhilarated to terrified. They were arranged around the diagram in a pattern that suggested a ritual formation, each one positioned at a cardinal point. "It's not stabilizing," Dolohov said. His voice was strained. It's not, shut up. Concentrate." Nott's voice was tight, controlled, but Harry could hear the thread of panic beneath it. "The binding needs more power. Push." The students pushed. Harry felt their magic surge, a combined output that was impressive for a group of teenagers and entirely insufficient for whatever they were trying to do. The artifact pulsed brighter. The hum climbed in pitch. The runes on the floor flickered, and one of them, a containment symbol on the eastern edge, cracked. Not metaphorically. The glow in the rune fractured like glass, and a tendril of dark energy leaked through the break like smoke through a fissure. One of the 7th years stumbled backward. "Something's wrong." "Something's," the artifact exploded. Not in fire or shrapnel, in magic. A wave of dark energy burst outward from the stone in a sphere that expanded like a shockwave, tearing through the runic diagram, shattering the containment array, and hitting the students like a wall. Dolohov was thrown off his feet. One of the 7th years slammed into the wall and crumpled. Nott staggered but kept his footing, his wand up, shouting an incantation Harry couldn't hear over the roar of unleashed power. The dark energy didn't dissipate. It pooled on the ceiling like an inverted lake, black and roiling, and from its surface things began to emerge, shapes, half-formed, like shadows given substance. They dropped from the ceiling in clumps of darkness that hit the floor and immediately began to spread, creeping along the stone like oil, reaching for the nearest living thing. Wraiths. Not dementors, something older, rawer, the kind of semi-sentient dark manifestation that occurred when concentrated malevolent magic was released without proper containment. Harry had read about them. He'd never seen them. They were supposed to be theoretical. They were not theoretical. One of them reached the fallen 7th year and wrapped around his legs, and the boy screamed, that same high, thin scream Harry had heard from the dungeons, and his skin went gray where the shadow touched it, the color draining out of him like water out of a cracked cup. Harry moved. He didn't think about cover. Didn't think about what it would reveal. A student was dying in front of him, and the thing inside him, the thing that had walked into a forest to die for people he loved, the thing that had fought a war and refused to bend, that thing didn't calculate. It acted. Expecto Patronum. The silver phoenix erupted from the U-wand with a force that rocked Harry back on his heels. It was enormous, wingspan wider than his arms could reach, blazing with white silver light that turned the dark classroom into something like noon. The phoenix screamed, a real sound, not silent like the one in his bedroom at the orphanage, a piercing, magnificent cry that shattered the darkness like glass. The wraiths recoiled. The one wrapped around the 7th year's legs released him, shrinking back from the light, and the others froze in their spreading advance. The silver phoenix banked, circled, and dove, not attacking but cleansing, its light burning through the dark energy like sunlight through fog. Where it passed, the shadows evaporated. The roiling mass on the ceiling shrank, retreated, collapsed in on itself. But the artifact was still active. The stone on the floor was pulsing faster now, the hum climbing toward a frequency that was less sound and more sensation, a pressure behind Harry's eyes, a taste of copper on his tongue. The containment array was gone. Nothing was holding the artifact in check, and it was building towards something worse. Harry strode into the room. Not saw him, and his eyes went wide, not just surprise but something deeper, something that looked almost like recognition, as if he was seeing Harry clearly for the first time. Riddle, how did you, shut up. Harry dropped to his knees beside the artifact. He could feel the dark magic pouring off it like heat from a furnace, pressing against his skin, trying to get in. The U-wand vibrated in his hand, and he could feel the phoenix feather core responding to the darkness with a fierce, bright rejection. He needed to contain it. Not destroy it. He didn't know what destroying an active dark artifact would do, and in this enclosed space the results could be catastrophic. He needed a containment ward. Something strong enough to hold the artifact's output until it burned itself out. Harry had never cast a ward under pressure. He'd studied them, obsessively, in Azkaban, where he'd had nothing but time and memory to work with, but study and practice were different things, and this was so far beyond practice that the word didn't apply. He raised his wand. Drew on everything he knew, the theory from Waffling's book, the practical frameworks from the texts he'd been reading in the library, the instinctive understanding of magical structure that came from 2 decades of experience filtered through a prodigious magical core. He cast. Not a single spell, a sequence. Ward anchors first, 4 of them, driven into the stone floor at cardinal points around the artifact with pulses of raw magic that left scorch marks on the flagstones. Then the connecting lines, not runic, he didn't have time for precision work, just raw magical energy shaped by will into barriers. Then the cap, a dome of force that settled over the artifact like a bell jar, transparent and shimmering, holding the dark energy inside. The hum dropped. The pressure eased. The artifact pulsed against the inside of the ward and the ward held. Harry sat back on his heels. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurring at the edges. He'd just channeled more magic in 60 seconds than most adult wizards used in a week, and even Riddle's monstrous core had limits. The room was quiet. The wraiths were gone, burned away by the Patronus. The silver phoenix circled once overhead and faded. The 7th year on the floor was breathing. Harry could see his chest moving, but his skin was still gray and he needed medical attention. Harry looked up. 5 pairs of eyes stared back at him. Not. Dolohov. Mulciber. The two seventh years. Every face wore the same expression, a mixture of shock and awe and the dawning recognition that the 11-year-old kneeling on the floor had just done something that should have been impossible. How? Dolohov breathed. Harry stood. His legs were unsteady but they held. He looked at Nott, and the anger that had been simmering beneath his strategic patience since the first Friday meeting broke the surface. What the hell is that thing? Nott's jaw worked. For the first time since Harry had known him, the older boy looked rattled, the smooth confidence stripped away, revealing something younger and more frightened underneath. A resonant stone, Nott said. It amplifies magical intent. We were told, he stopped. You were told what? By whom? That's not I just saved your life, Nott. And theirs. Harry pointed at the injured seventh year. And in about 5 minutes, this ward is going to fail because I'm 11 years old and I don't have the reserves to maintain it indefinitely. So I suggest you tell me exactly what that thing is and where it came from before we all find out what happens when an uncontained resonant stone reaches critical mass. Silence. It came from outside, Nott said. The words came slowly, each one dragged out against his will. A contact. In Grindelwald's network. They said it would enhance our magic. Allow us to demonstrate the kind of power that would attract more followers. They said the containment ritual was simple. They lied. Evidently. Harry stared at him. Thaddeus Nott, charming, intelligent, sincere Thaddeus Nott, who believed in his cause with the fervor of a convert and the discipline of a soldier, had smuggled an unknown dark artifact into a school full of children on the word of a foreign terrorist network. He hadn't tested it. Hadn't had it examined by anyone with expertise. Hadn't considered the possibility that Grindelwald's people might have their own reasons for placing a weapon inside Hogwarts. You're an idiot, Harry said. Nott flinched. You're a brilliant, charismatic, dangerously persuasive idiot, and you nearly killed everyone in this room. Harry turned to the others. Dolohov, get that boy to the hospital wing. Tell the nurse he touched something cursed. Don't elaborate. Mulciber, clear the corridor. If anyone comes through here before we've cleaned this up, we're all expelled. They stared at him. He was 11. He was a first year giving orders to students 5 and 6 years his senior. The absurdity of it hung in the air for exactly 1 second before Dolohov moved, lifted the injured 7th year in a fireman's carry and left the room at a run. Mulciber followed, wand drawn, without a word. Which left Harry and Nott and the remaining 7th year, a pale girl who was pressed against the far wall with her wand clutched to her chest and her eyes very wide. Go, Harry told her. Go to bed. Don't speak of this. She went. Harry and Nott stood on opposite sides of the contained artifact. The ward was flickering, Harry could feel it eroding, his magic stretched too thin. He needed a more permanent solution, and he needed it in the next few minutes. Can you destroy it? Nott asked. I don't know what destroying it would do. It might release everything it's absorbed. Then what do we do? Harry closed his eyes. Thought. In his previous life, the Order of the Phoenix had dealt with dark artifacts through specialized cursebreakers, Bill Weasley and his Gringotts team, professionals with decades of training. Harry was not a cursebreaker. But he had something they didn't, a deep, intuitive understanding of dark magic that came from having a piece of Voldemort's soul living in his head for 17 years. The artifact was a resonance stone. It amplified and reflected magical intent. The containment ritual had failed because the student's intent had been unfocused, a mix of ambition, excitement, fear, and ideology that the stone had amplified indiscriminately, creating a feedback loop that escalated until the containment broke. The solution wasn't more containment. It was the opposite. You didn't fight a resonance by building walls around it. You fought it by giving it nothing to resonate with. Harry dropped his ward. Nott made a sharp sound of alarm, but Harry was already moving, stepping forward, placing his hand on the stone. The dark magic hit him like a tidal wave. It surged up his arm and through his body, a screaming torrent of raw power that was looking for intent, for anger, for ambition, for desire, for anything it could latch onto and amplify. It tore through his surface thoughts like claws through paper and found nothing. Harry had emptied himself. Not a clemency, something more fundamental. The skill he'd learned in Azkaban, in the darkest hours, when the Dementors had taken everything and there was nothing left except the bare fact of existence. The ability to be still. To have no desire, no fear, no anger, no hope. To be a hollow vessel, a clear window, a mirror with nothing to reflect. The resonant stone pulsed. Searched. Found nothing to amplify. And like a fire without fuel, it began to die. The hum dropped. The glow faded. The stone in Harry's hand went from burning hot to warm to cool, and the dark energy that had filled the room contracted, thinned, and disappeared like mist in sunlight. Harry opened his hand. The stone sat on his palm, inert. Just a rock. Dark, rough, unremarkable. He set it on the floor and stepped back. His hand was shaking. His whole body was shaking. The effort of emptying himself so completely, of becoming nothing, of being no one, had cost him something he couldn't name but could feel, a bruise on the inside of his soul. Nott was staring at him. His face was white. "What are you?" Nott whispered. "Just a boy who wants to learn," Harry said, and the words tasted like ash. "Isn't that what I told everyone? No one, no adult wizard I've ever met could have done that. The Patronus alone, a corporeal Patronus at 11, and the wards, and then you just touched it, and now it's over." Harry met Nott's eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to destroy that stone. You're going to cut contact with whoever gave it to you. And you're going to disband the group. I can't, you can. You will. Because if you don't, I will go to Dumbledore and tell him everything. The meetings, the artifact, the Grindelwald connection. Everything." The color drained from Nott's face. "You'd be implicating yourself. You attended the meetings. I attended 2 discussions about the Statute of Secrecy. You smuggled a dark artifact into a school and nearly killed a student. Those aren't the same thing, and we both know how Dumbledore would see it." Silence. The extinguished candles. The scorch marks on the floor. The faint smell of ozone that lingered after powerful magic. "You planned this," Nott said slowly. "From the first meeting. You came to the group knowing what it was. You were watching me." "Yes. Why? What do you care about Grindelwald's network?" Harry looked at him, this bright, dangerous, sincere young man who believed so passionately in a cause that would consume him and everyone like him, and felt something unexpected. Not sympathy, exactly. But recognition. He'd known people like Nott. He'd fought beside them and against them and buried them, and the tragedy was always the same, wasted potential. Brilliance bent toward destruction because nobody had caught it in time and pointed it somewhere else. "Because someone has to," Harry said. "Because Grindelwald isn't offering liberation. He's offering a war that the magical world can't win and the Muggle world won't survive. And the people in this school, the students in your group, they're going to be the first casualties. Not the last. The first." Nott's throat worked. He looked away, toward the window, toward the dark grounds beyond, toward a future he was only beginning to see clearly. "The people I communicate with," he said quietly. "Grindelwald's network. They won't take kindly to being cut off. Then give them to Dumbledore. Names, methods, everything you know. Let the adults handle it." "You say that like you're not an adult yourself." The observation hung in the air. Harry said nothing. "I need time," Nott said. "To think. To decide. You have until morning. After that, I go to Dumbledore with or without your cooperation." Harry turned and walked out of the room. His legs carried him down the stairs, through the corridors, back toward the dungeons, and he held himself together with nothing but willpower and the knowledge that if he stopped moving he'd collapse. He made it to the common room. Made it through the entrance. Made it 3 steps past the threshold before his knees buckled and he caught himself on the back of a leather armchair, breathing hard, the yuan slipping from fingers that had gone numb. The room was empty. The fire was dead. The lake light was the only illumination, and in its shifting green glow Harry pressed his forehead against the cold leather and let the shaking take him. He'd done too much. Used too much magic, too fast, with a body that was still growing into its power. The magical exhaustion was a physical thing, a bone-deep depletion that made his vision swim and his muscles burn. He needed sleep. He needed food. He needed about 12 hours of unconsciousness and a week of recovery. He had until morning. Harry retrieved his wand from the floor. He half walked, half stumbled to the dormitory, crawled into bed without undressing, and pulled the curtains closed. Around him, the other boys slept, Abraxas's measured breathing, Lestrange's restless shifting, Crabbe's gentle snoring. Normal sounds. The sounds of children who had no idea what had almost happened 3 floors above them. Harry stared at the canopy and waited for dawn. It came slowly. Gray light filtered through the lake water, turning the dormitory from black to green to a pale, washed-out silver. Harry rose, washed his face, changed his clothes. His hands had steadied. His vision was clear. The exhaustion remained, a heavy anchor behind his ribs, but he could function. He went to breakfast. Sat at the Slytherin table. Ate mechanically, toast, eggs, tea. The great hall was full of morning noise, students chattering, the clatter of cutlery, the rustle of post owls swooping through the enchanted ceiling. Not was not at breakfast. Harry ate. Waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then he stood, left the great hall, and climbed to Dumbledore's office. It was on the 1st floor in 1938, not the 7th. Dumbledore was a professor, not a headmaster, and his office reflected it. Smaller, more cluttered, with books stacked on every surface and a collection of silver instruments on a shelf that Harry recognized with a jolt of familiarity. The same instruments that would one day sit in the headmaster's office, puffing and spinning and tracking things only Dumbledore understood. Harry knocked. The door opened. Dumbledore was at his desk, marking essays. He looked up, and whatever he saw on Harry's face made him set down his quill immediately. "Tom. Come in." Harry sat in the chair opposite the desk. He looked at Dumbledore, and for a long moment he couldn't speak, because the thing he was about to do, the trust he was about to extend, went against every instinct that Azkaban had branded into his soul. Trust got you killed. Trust got you chained and silenced and left to rot. Trust was Hermione's tears and Ron's rehearsed testimony and a cell door closing on everything you were. But distrust got you something worse. It got you Voldemort. It got you a brilliant boy who never let anyone in and rotted from the inside out and took the world down with him. Harry chose. "There's a group of students in Slytherin who are in contact with Grindelwald's network," he said. "They've been meeting on Friday nights on the 4th floor. Last night, they activated a dark artifact, a resonance stone, that was smuggled into the school. A student was injured. The artifact is contained but needs to be destroyed by someone qualified." He placed the inert stone on Dumbledore's desk. Dumbledore looked at it. Looked at Harry. His expression went through several transitions in rapid succession: surprise, concern, calculation, something that might have been alarm. "How do you know this?" Dumbledore asked. "I attended 2 of their meetings. I suspected what they were and I wanted to confirm it before coming to you. You, an 11-year-old first year, infiltrated a supremacist cell and gathered intelligence on your own initiative." "Yes." "And the artifact?" "You said it was contained." "I contained it. Last night. It was, It got out of hand. Their containment ritual failed. Dumbledore picked up the stone. He held it the way he'd held the transfigured chess piece, carefully, as if it might bite. His wand appeared in his other hand and he cast several diagnostic spells in quick succession, murmuring incantations Harry recognized from curse-breaking manuals. "This is a Nuremberg resonance amplifier," Dumbledore said slowly. "They haven't been manufactured since 1802. They're classified as Class A non-tradable dark objects by every magical government in Europe." He set it down. "How did you contain it?" "I neutralized the resonance. Gave it nothing to amplify. That requires a state of complete mental and emotional vacancy. Monks train for decades to achieve it." "How?" Dumbledore stopped. His blue eyes fixed on Harry with an intensity that was almost painful. "Tom. I am going to ask you again, and this time I need a real answer. Who are you?" Harry sat in the chair in Dumbledore's office and felt the weight of 2 lifetimes pressing down on him like a physical force. The truth was right there, behind his teeth, wanting out. All of it: Harry Potter, Azkaban, the future, the betrayal, the death, the impossible rebirth. He could say it. He could finally stop carrying it alone. But he couldn't give Dumbledore all of it. Not the full truth. That was too much, too dangerous, too likely to shatter the fragile trust he was trying to build. The full truth would make him a specimen, an object of study, a problem to be solved. And Harry was done being other people's problem. He could, however, give him a piece. "I'm not a normal child," Harry said. "You know that. You've known it since the orphanage." "Yes. I have, knowledge. Experience. Things I shouldn't have at 11. I can't explain where they come from. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He paused. "But I can tell you what I am. I'm someone who's seen what happens when brilliant people go dark. When ideology becomes more important than people. When power becomes its own justification." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I'm someone who's trying very hard to make sure it doesn't happen again." The office was quiet. A silver instrument on the shelf puffed a ring of smoke that hovered in the air between them. "You speak as if you've lived through a war," Dumbledore said softly. "I speak as if I've lived through something. Isn't that enough?" A long silence. Dumbledore removed his spectacles, polished them on his sleeve, the same gesture his older self would make, the same nervous tell, and put them back on. "It is not enough," Dumbledore said. "But I accept that it is all you can give me at present." He leaned forward. "Tom, or whoever you truly are, I have a responsibility to the students in this school. If Grindelwald's network has penetrated Hogwarts, I need to act. I will need names. Thaddeus Nod is the organizer. I believe he's prepared to cooperate, or he was, as of last night. Dolohov, Mulciber, and Avery are members. There are others I haven't identified." Dumbledore nodded. He was already moving, the hesitation of the personal conversation giving way to the decisive energy of a man who was, whatever his flaws, supremely competent when action was required. "I will speak with Headmaster Dippet. And with the Auror office." He paused. "Your involvement will be kept confidential. You have my word." "Thank you, Professor." Harry stood to leave. He was at the door when Dumbledore spoke again. "Tom." He turned. Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression Harry had never seen on any version of the man, not the knowing twinkle, not the careful assessment, not the calculated warmth. Something unguarded. Something real. "I have spent many years watching promising students choose poorly," Dumbledore said. "Watched them seduced by power, by ideology, by the intoxicating certainty that they know better than everyone else. I have blamed myself for not reaching them. For not saying the right thing at the right moment." He paused. "I don't know what you are. But I know what you did last night. You protected people, at great personal risk, when you could have walked away. That tells me more than any explanation you could offer." Harry's throat tightened. He thought of another office, another Dumbledore, a conversation after a different crisis. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities. "I had a good teacher once," Harry said. "He told me that it's our choices that define us. I'm trying to make the right ones." Something flickered across Dumbledore's face, a question, a suspicion, a connection almost made. But he didn't press it. He simply nodded. "Then I will trust your choices, for now. And I will be here when you're ready to tell me the rest." Harry left the office. He descended the stairs, passed through the first-floor corridor, and walked out of the castle into the October morning. The grounds were beautiful. The lake shimmered under a sky of pale blue, and the forbidden forest was a wall of gold and crimson along the horizon, and the air was cool and clean and tasted of nothing at all, no stone, no despair, no Dementor cold. Just air. Just morning. Just the world, impossibly ordinary, impossibly lovely. Harry walked to the lake. He sat on the bank where generations of students had sat before him and would sit after him, and he watched the water move in slow, glinting ripples, and he breathed. The crisis was over. Knott's group would be dismantled. The Grindelwald connection would be investigated. The students who'd been involved would face consequences, expulsion, maybe, or probation at least, and the pipeline that had been funneling dark ideology into Hogwarts would be sealed. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Grindelwald was still out there, still building, still gathering power. The Muggle War was still coming. The long chain of events that would lead, eventually, to Voldemort, that chain was broken now, but new chains could form, new threats could emerge, and Harry couldn't predict them all or prevent them all or carry the weight of them all on shoulders that were still, technically, a child's. But he could do this. One crisis at a time. One choice at a time. One day at a time. Footsteps behind him. He didn't turn. Minerva McGonagall sat down on the bank beside him. She was carrying a book, she was always carrying a book, and she set it on the grass and looked out at the lake with the same expression Harry was wearing, the quiet contemplation of someone processing something complicated. "There's a rumor," she said, "that something happened last night. On the 4th floor. There's always a rumor. This one says a first-year Slytherin faced down a dark magical creature with a Patronus charm. A corporeal Patronus." She turned to look at him. "That's supposed to be impossible for a student. Lots of things are supposed to be impossible. Tom." Her voice was firm, no nonsense, the voice of a future headmistress already taking shape inside an 11-year-old girl. "I'm not asking for confirmation. I'm asking if you're all right." The question caught him off guard. Not the words, the intention. She wasn't digging for information. She wasn't trying to assess him or use him or position herself. She was asking because she'd noticed something was wrong and she cared. When was the last time someone had asked Harry Potter if he was all right and actually wanted to know the answer? He couldn't remember. He stopped. The automatic response, "Fine, I'm fine, everything's fine," stuck in his throat. He was not fine. He was exhausted and haunted and carrying the memories of a dead man in the body of a monster, and the loneliness was a weight that grew heavier with every passing day, and he'd spent last night fighting shadows and confronting zealots and touching a dark artifact with his bare hand, and he was 11 years old and he was so tired. "I'm getting there," he said instead. Minerva nodded. She didn't press. She just sat with him on the bank of the lake, her book in the grass between them, and watched the water move. After a while, she said, "My mother told me something before I left for Hogwarts. She said the most important thing I'd learn at school wasn't magic. It was who to trust." She paused. "I think I'm a decent judge. And I think you're someone worth trusting, Tom Riddle. Whatever you're carrying." Harry looked at her. This girl who would one day stand on the battlements of this castle and call its stone guardians to war. Who would face Voldemort's armies without flinching. Who would be the last line of defense for a generation of students she'd given her life to protecting. She was 11, and she was already herself, and the sight of her, steady, certain, offering trust without conditions, broke something open in Harry that he'd been holding shut since the day he died. "Thank you, Minerva," he said. His voice was rough. "You're welcome." She picked up her book. "Now, I don't suppose you could explain the theory behind the switching spell?" The textbook's explanation is appalling, and Professor Dumbledore's essay prompt is due Thursday. Harry laughed. The sound startled him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed, genuinely laughed, not the wild broken sound from the courtroom but actual laughter, the kind that came from a real place and meant a real thing. "The key is understanding that you're not moving two objects," he said. "You're exchanging their spatial coordinates. The objects stay where they are, it's the space that moves." Minerva's eyes lit up. "That's not in the textbook. The textbook is oversimplified. You keep saying that. It keeps being true." They talked. About transfiguration, then about charms theory, then about the differences between the magical and muggle worlds, then about nothing in particular. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, the way conversations did when two intelligent people found each other and didn't have to pretend to be less than they were. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't alliance building. It was just, talking. Sitting by a lake on an autumn morning, talking to someone who saw you as a person and not a puzzle. Harry hadn't known how badly he'd needed that until he had it. The morning wore on. Students drifted across the grounds in groups, heading to the greenhouses or the Quidditch pitch or just enjoying the last of the October warmth before winter set in. Eventually, Minerva stood and brushed grass from her robes. "I have herbology," she said. "And you have, whatever it is you do when you disappear for hours at a time." "I have plans." "You always have plans." She shouldered her book bag. "Come find me in the library this evening. I want to hear your theory about spatial coordinate exchange in more detail." "I will." She walked away across the grounds, her braid swinging, her stride purposeful. Harry watched her go and felt something settle in his chest, not the fragile hope from Wool's orphanage, not the sharp-edged determination of the Slytherin common room, but something quieter and stronger. A foundation. Something to build on. He sat by the lake for a long time after she left. The water moved. The castle stood. The sky was blue and vast and empty, and somewhere above it, beyond it, in a future that might never exist now, Harry Potter had died in a cell with no one to mourn him. But Tom Riddle was alive. And he had a wand and a purpose and the beginning of something that might, if he was very careful and very brave and very lucky, become a life worth living. Harry stood. He brushed the grass from his robes. He looked up at Hogwarts, the towers, the turrets, the lit windows, the castle that had been his home and his battlefield and his grave and was now, impossibly, his home again. The path ahead was long. Years of careful work, of building alliances and dismantling threats and reshaping the trajectory of a world that didn't know it needed reshaping. Grindelwald was still out there. Dumbledore's reckoning was still to come. The war, the Muggle War, the Magical War, the wars that hadn't been imagined yet, was still gathering on the horizon like storm clouds. But the first step had been taken. The resonance stone was on Dumbledore's desk. Knott's network was crumbling. Abraxas Malfoy was sitting at breakfast beside a half-blood orphan. Minerva McGonagall was walking to herbology with a smile on her face. And a silver phoenix had spread its wings in a dark room and driven back the shadows. Harry started walking toward the castle. The morning light caught the lake and turned it to gold, and the castle's reflection shimmered on the water like a promise, and the air was clean and cold and real. He was not Harry Potter. He was not Tom Riddle. He was something new, something forged in the fire of two lives and the darkness between them, something that hadn't existed before and might never be fully understood. But he was here. He was alive. And for the first time since the doors of Azkaban closed behind a boy who no longer existed, the person walking across these grounds felt something that wasn't pain or strategy or the grim machinery of survival. He felt like he was home. The castle doors opened before him, warm and golden, and Harry walked through them into the light.